All right, everyone, just a quick reminder, this is a work session starting at 5:35 here. There's no public comment and also no agenda item. There's no agenda items. Nothing will be voted on, no actions taking for the work session portion. We'll take probably a quick 5-minute break before we start the regular session at 6:30. So thank you everyone for coming. Cody, if you'd like to go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Cody Bird, Planning Director. This is a work session, and as the chairman pointed out, we won't take any action, but I wanted to take a few minutes to kind of highlight the land use code that the Planning Commission's been working on for a number of months now. We put the full land use code with changes tracked. We put a draft version out early February, and we've tracked all changes made since then using the standard underlined crossed out method. So you can see those changes in the packet in your draft, or the draft packet in your draft land use code in your packet. There we go. So just wanted to, I'll give a little bit more background information when we get to the public hearing item. But for the Planning Commission and those who've been following over these last several months, I wanted to keep it my presentation a little bit shorter and focus on some of the highlighted changes, and I'll give a little more context in the regular meeting for the public hearing. But so in your packet, we did include a sheet of the public comments that staff has received either via email or via our online comment form on our website. So you can see those public comments, and you can see the town staff response to those comments. We've tried really hard to address the subject matter in a meaningful way. Not all of them were a direct one-to-one match, but we feel like we've done a good job of identifying what those comments and questions were, the right code section, and provide some either clarity, answer the questions, or provided different options to address those comments. In addition to the public comments, town staff is continuing to work through the document. We have had a number of staff comments related to particular sections that we've included some changes to. We've included some changes for legal clarity and effect, and we recognize that we've got some additional cleanup to do. We know that there's some formatting, or some spelling was pointed out to me earlier today. We've got some cross references where the numbers might not match correctly, and we'll go through and fix those, make sure all the images are properly identified to the correct section of the code. So we know that there's always a process of getting the document finalized, kind of polishing, cleaning up all those formatting things. So we'll continue to do that while we're considering this, and we'll have that clean option available. So that's kind of, at least from the code standpoint, kind of process and where we're at. A couple of the highlighted changes I wanted to discuss, and specifically one of the directions from the Planning Commission from the last conversation. The public comments that we've been receiving have been primarily 3 subject matters. There's a lot of attention being given to the downtown neighborhood zones, particularly Harrison and McKinley Avenues. So I'll touch on that. We've received several public comments regarding the landscaping standards and provisions, primarily applicability. A lot of the comments that we received were that these landscape requirements shouldn't be held to residential owners for how they do their landscape. And that's not the intent. We clarified with an applicability statement. What the landscape provisions are intended for are new developments, commercial and multifamily residential, so that when a new development is put in, they're meeting the current or proposed landscape standards, which have an emphasis on water conservation to protect our limited water resources for the future. So we've clarified that. We think as best, we've taken a stab at it. If there's additional clarifications needed, we're happy to consider those comments and continue to work on that. And the third category that we've received some feedback on was the sign code. As a reminder, our current sign code is what I would say dramatically out of compliance with best practices and legal clarity and effect for signs and freedom of speech. The proposed sign code that we've drafted provides that clarity and modernizes our sign code. There's a lot of length added, which you might see a lot of it is definitions and descriptions for various sign elements that didn't exist in our prior code that just simply weren't addressed. So we've really brought that up to a more modern standard and protected freedom of speech by not regulating the content of signs. A lot of our old regulations were specific to this type of sign or that type of sign, which has been determined by the Supreme Court to be an infringement of freedom of speech. We feel like the proposal we've put before you no longer has those same concerns from a legal effect. And so some of the questions were related largely to how many signs can be placed on a property, the size of those signs, and how do we still allow freedom of speech and flexibility for special events such as elections, weddings, graduations, celebrations of that nature. So we did propose for temporary signs, allowing up to 6 signs per residential property, up to 6 square feet each. And we've added a new provision after receiving some public comments that allows for an additional 2 signs up to the 6 square feet each for 3 times a year, 70 days each for special events. So that should encompass elections, special celebrations, other things that might need to have an additional temporary sign. The proposed sign regulations also allow one of those signs to be displayed continuously throughout the year, so it doesn't have to be brought down. That was important to, some signs don't have an event or context. It's just freedom of speech that needs to be be able to be displayed at all times, and so we've protected that in the code. We also added a section called sandwich board signs. We heard that making sure that the downtown businesses have the ability to display signs for their business on Cleveland. And we didn't feel that the temporary sign section had adequately addressed the types of signs that would be most impactful for our downtown businesses. So we did add that new section allowing sandwich board signs with no limitation on the number of days that can be displayed, simply a limitation on the hours that it can be displayed so that they're not left out overnight where they would be vandalized or blown away in the wind or what have you. So, and most of our businesses do that already just to protect their investment in the sign. So we felt that was a pretty reasonable standard. So that was signs and the landscaping I touched on. I want to go back to the C2 and the R4 zone districts. That's the downtown core commercial, and the R4 is the downtown neighborhoods, the residential category. When we talked about this with the commission at the last work session, the direction from the planning commission was to staff to consider and develop an overlay zone district for to apply to the C2 zone that would allow additional residential and restrict the number and types of uses in those areas along Harrison and McKinley Avenue. And staff, with help from Logan Simpson and our subcontractors, we took an effort to write that overlay district. What we found was that effort, we were basically describing the R4 residential categories. And so in the proposed draft, we did not include an overlay zone district because our attempt at doing that resulted in the R4 residential category. So what we're proposing for the Planning Commission to consider, we've heard the public comments that there's concerns about protecting the residential character and nature of these streets in our downtown adjacent to Cleveland. We've heard the desire to maintain that residential character. We've heard, I would say, mixed comments about allowing new businesses versus restricting businesses from being located along those corridors. And so what we've proposed is in that R4 category. R4 is the residential, the downtown neighborhoods. It's a residential category. We've proposed limiting the types of businesses to only those that could be reasonably accommodated within an existing residential structure. The standards for maintaining a residential character, including certain elements like front porches, styles compatible with a farmhouse, Victorian or craftsman style home, provisions for parking, all of those use limitations are still included. And the couple of business opportunities that we've proposed remain for professional services like offices, real estate agents, architects, insurance, maybe art studios, salons, things that would be compatible within one of the existing residential structures. We've proposed them to be allowed as conditional uses as opposed to permitted by right. So those uses would have to come and seek that approval for that district, which includes, staff is proposing it would include Harrison and McKinley Avenues for the R4 zoning designation. This kind of shift in philosophy, staff, and this is, staff presenting what we feel would adequately address the public comments that we've received. We feel that this approach would meet the desires that we've heard through public comments, both in the land use code considerations and going back and looking through comments in the comprehensive plan. We feel like this is a better fit than what was proposed originally. And so staff's recommendation would be to, when we update the official zoning map for the town, which is the process of applying these new district standards to the appropriate properties, our suggestion is to simply zone the Harrison and McKinley Avenues as R4 downtown, or yes, downtown residential for those categories, which are much more limited than the C2 commercial categories. So I wanted to specifically highlight that because it's a departure from the guidance that we received from the Planning Commission to consider the overlay zone. We just didn't find that overlay to be as all-encompassing as this approach, and probably adding an additional layer to zone a property commercial and then take away the commercial uses would make it more complicated, I think, than many of the downtown residents had expressed for having clarity and simply protecting their rights to their residential properties. So that was a piece I wanted to highlight specifically.
Yeah.
So at this point, I've given the Planning Commission a lengthy packet to evaluate. Those were the highlighted things that I wanted to call to your attention. And I wanted to leave the rest of the time to the commission. You're familiar with all the various sections of this proposed code, but I wanted to give you time to discuss and ask any questions of staff. And we're here to support you in anything that you need to consider as part of your work session before the public hearing.
So C2, not C2, R4, right? That's not just McKinley. That's downtown. Okay, right? And our whole idea is to try to protect that theme, that architectural theme of being homes, single family homes. And if a business that you mentioned, there's about 4 of them, I think, 4 or 5 businesses in there, right?
You have
Yeah,
4 or 5
not very
categories.
many. They're conducive to being in a single family home. That wouldn't change or alter and everything's got to be conditional. It's got to come back before the planning commission, get approved. So it's going to have to go back for public comment and get ferreted out and make sure it was right. So I think that's about the best you can do. I don't know what, I think that protects our people and makes everybody go through their certain hoops. And if there's a business that comes in that the residents there don't like, they can come up here and express those concerns on a particular resident. I mean, that's the intent, right? Well, I think we did about the best we could with that then.
Staff has certainly tried to address the concerns that we've heard in a meaningful way. So yeah, I agree with you, Mayor. And staff is absolutely willing to look at any of those provisions if you want to see further changes, but we did try very hard to take what we're hearing into account when we wrote the proposed revisions here. And if anyone would like, beginning on page 84 of the packet is where the land use table is located, to go through that R4 column and look at what uses are permitted and what uses are conditional. And I'm happy to highlight any of those if you desire.
I'm seeing part I'm seeing, but I think that's a change, the brew club.
Ms. Connect,
distillery.
Commissioner Connect, could you please speak into your
Sorry.
microphone?
Sorry, yeah,
Thanks.
I'm seeing on the R4 brew pub distillery, is that a C because it got crossed off? It's crossed off.
It's a blue C. That means it can't happen.
Correct. We removed
Moved
the
it,
brew
okay.
pubs from the R4 zone.
Having a hard time with my vision there. Thank you.
Yes, and sorry, that crossed out line in the table is kind of hard to read. So maybe, why don't I go through the R4 real quickly for those uses? So the mixed use dwelling that was originally proposed as being permitted has been changed to conditional, so it'd require a separate approval process. Multifamily dwellings that were originally proposed as conditional has been eliminated, so multifamily would not be a permitted use. It would, if one was to be considered, they could propose a rezone, and would be considered as a public hearing and separate action item. Single family is still protected. Bed and breakfast, boarding and rooming houses are identified as conditional. Brew pub has been eliminated as a conditional use. It's no longer permitted. Art studio is proposed as a conditional use. Childcare center is proposed as a conditional use. Professional services, which would be primarily office spaces, and that's described in the chapter 9 for definitions, is proposed as a conditional use. Professional offices is proposed as a conditional use. And community facilities, religious land uses, and civic spaces are all identified as permitted uses within that zone district. We heard several comments about making sure that we allowed adequate space for religious land uses. And so that was another change, different note, but they're included as permitted or conditional uses in more zone districts now than was originally proposed. So that was the highlight of the R4 zone uses, primarily residential, a few limited business type uses allowed as conditional. No multifamily allowed.
I think this is a great solution for the problem, not necessarily the direction that we gave, but I think it solves all the problems that we considered because it allows, you know, the right character to be maintained and the like right feel, but also gives property owners the right to do more with their property if they chose to do so in those areas. So I like that. I do have a question though, and I can look at this up in the definitions, but I just want to make sure everybody's clear is, do we have any multifamily dwellings currently in the area that would likely be the downtown R4?
There's not any true multifamily. There are several properties that are attached single family.
Okay.
There are some fourplexes. The housing authorities project is attached units, and there's a couple of duplexes throughout.
Yeah.
So there are a number of attached single family, which has a higher density, but they would not be multifamily in the sense that multifamily is primarily apartments and condos.
Great. Okay. I do want to make sure that if we did acknowledge that, so single family attached dwelling is permitted as well as detached, but just no multifamily. So I think that's a great combination to all the concerns that we've received, to be honest. I think it acknowledges all of them. So I'm really happy with that as a solution.
I think it protects status quo, and that after all the public comment and the rounds we've gone about R4 and C2 and Harrison and McKinley, to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, but it feels like that was the goal, was to protect status quo for downtown. So I feel like this does it. And I know I spoke out against it at one point, making sure that, you know, private homeowners still had the flexibility to open a small business or renovate their home if they wanted to do an art studio or a small office in the back. They're free to, at any point, request a zoning change to C2, open up the studio. It goes through the same planning process as a site plan would, or as anything else that comes before the planning commission. So I love it. I think it's a fantastic solution. I'm on board with it.
I would concur. So I had a question about wireless telecommunications facility. So I don't think we're going to be seeing the 5G where they're putting these boxes up every, I don't know how frequent. I just don't see that coming to Wellington anytime soon. I could be very wrong about that. Is that considered a wireless telecommunications facility, or is it just a piece of dispersed hardware?
Yeah, so there's generally two categories for wireless I'll say three. So a new wireless facility would be like a new monopole structure, and taking a clean site and putting up a big pole or a tower for housing array. And the array is the second category, usually located on a pole or facility We also have arrays on the existing grain elevator. We have arrays on the pole sign out here for Shell, and Burger King has an array on it. And then there's a third category that's called a distributed antenna system. And those are the style that more of the companies are going to. They provide actually a little bit better level of service and a localized level, and they can disguise them a lot better. So they're not big poles that impact, the skyline and have flashing lights and things on them. Distributed antenna systems are typically placed on streetlights, power utility poles, and they're very small, kind of like your wireless looking boxes in your offices. And it's distributed, meaning they're placed multiple on smaller sites that don't have a footprint or an impact from a zoning and land use standpoint. They're basically more like a utility. And so those are the three categories. We don't have any specific regulations proposed for distributed antenna systems because we know that they're allowed and you almost don't notice that they're there. We've proposed communication facilities and for new sites and arrays, some specific language here for where and how, and those are proposed as conditional approvals only in the light industrial or public zone districts.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
All right.
Oh,
I have one, I guess. I'll bring this up now.
I'm sorry, real quick, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind. Mark White is one of the town's sub-consultants on this project with White Law and Planning and Law LLC. Mark, did you have anything you wanted to add on wireless? And you're muted, Mark.
I think you answered it, Cody. And I think the short answer is yes, they are considered wireless facilities and they're protected by the Federal Telecommunications Act. The FCC has some specific rulemaking for those that limit our ability to regulate. I think the distributed antenna up to a certain point geometrically, there's a shot clock. I've noticed the draft sends this to a conditional use permit process, but there has to be a time limit for that under federal law. We can't take all the time we think we need to take to make that decision. Once it's filed, there's a shot clock under federal law. Nor can we discriminate on the basis of the type of service that's provided. So, whether 5G is imminent or not, if somebody did propose it, then that shouldn't have any impact on our land use decision. So, but I think I think you answered it well, Cody.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And thank you for mentioning that too. I should have mentioned what Mark said, which was that the draft code that we've had help with from our legal experts here. We do have federal law that we have to consider and comply with, and it preempts a lot of local decisions that can be made for some of these factors. And as Mark said, does put time limits on how long we can take to address them. So that was an important comment to make. So thanks, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Cody.
So I guess we're done with that subject, C4, R4. I got one of them right.
If you
Can't
have
keep up. R4. We're good? Does anybody else got anything more? I'm not trying to take over.
No, you go. Wide open, Mr. Mayor, wide open.
So what do you think, Cody? Can we move on now? That's the case.
yeah,
I want to
happy-
talk about this one that we brought up a little bit there. We talked about it. Bert brought it up. We all brought it up. I want to go over and discuss exactly what this means and how it's applied. And I want to talk about this property that's if damaged more than 50%. And what's that mean? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I'll cover it at a high level general nature, and then as long as Mark is here, I'll ask him to speak to the nonconformities as well. That's one of his subject matter expertises. So I'm just going to simply start the conversation by explaining that the nonconforming section applies to all zoning districts, all uses, regardless. You have to have a provision that says, what do you do if? And that's what the nonconformities is. So, and just taking a quick step back, because we've got an audience here, nonconformities would be a use that's no longer allowed because the rules have changed. If a structure is non-conforming because it doesn't meet a setback because the rules have changed. If some provision of code has changed in a way that brings a property, a lot, a structure, a use, so that it's no longer meeting the current code requirements, it falls under the non-conforming category. And there's a whole chapter, it's chapter 7, that details what do you do if you own a property that doesn't comply with the regulations of the code. So it's a legislative measure that's proposed, and it would affect all the properties in town equally. The specific provision that was mentioned was the 50% damage. And as a rule, and this is common in most communities and rules, you have to draw a line somewhere where if the property is damaged, at what point is the owner allowed to rebuild it, or at what point do they have to bring it into compliance with the current regulations? And most communities have drawn that at 50%. So if it's damaged more than 50%, you would need to bring it into compliance with the current codes. So that's kind of the legislative background and how this is applied. Now, Mark, if you could provide any additional clarifications for that and maybe how it's been applied in other communities would be useful. Could you unmute, please, Mark?
Thank you for reminding me, Cody. Yeah, I think you're right. 50% is it's a simple number, so a lot of communities use that. Some go higher than that to provide more flexibility for continuation, but it's a policy issue, I think. So, but from my recollection of other codes, if you have a provision like this, that's a pretty common metric.
So here's I didn't mean to jump on you.
No, go for it.
So here's I don't know if you can answer. Downtown, R4, right? How many non-conforming structures we got?
For downtown, for what's proposed for R4, which is the area between basically Jefferson and Washington railroad tracks to 6th Street. I think, to be honest, there's a lot of nonconformities because there was a lack of regulation or oversight on the town's part, and or structures showed up without obtaining permits. And I mean, sheds, fences, there's a lot of structures that kind of show up and didn't meet the requirements. And staff isn't able to enforce every single one of those going back, decades. And so there's probably a lot of non-conforming structures in those areas. Non-conforming uses, I think, is pretty limited. I don't believe that there are a lot of non-conforming uses that wouldn't be able to be rebuilt if damaged. So I think the significant changes to residential uses if someone's home was damaged, I think it's pretty limited to those that would not be able to be rebuilt, if any. I think if a fence got blown down and it was found that it was not in compliance, usually the remedy is just put it in the right location or change the height to the right height. Those are usually pretty insignificant changes in the scheme of things. But from a use standpoint, I don't believe that there are a tremendous amount of nonconformities in our R4.
I'd say like all the garages essentially that butt directly into the alley. Those would be examples of non-conforming uses because they don't meet the requirements for the setbacks that we currently have right now, or that we're considering in these ones. But there's a very good reason why those setbacks are built in. It's for safety. So, I mean, I guess that could be an example of in the alley of my street, for example, the majority of the garages are right up against the alley, which is impossible to turn into, for one thing. So people don't actually use them as garages. And then, and it's not safe because if you're pulling out of it, you could run over somebody in the alley really easily too. So, but I guess that could be something. But I think the bigger problem that we were considering is the residential uses within C2. That was more of the concern, not within R4. I mean, there's going to be non-conforming uses there, obviously, like there's going to be examples of that. But I think the example that was brought up is if in C2 there was a home, and since that single family home wasn't a permitted use in C2, and that was damaged more than 50%, then they would not be able to rebuild that home. So I just want to make sure we're looking at in the scope of, I guess, when the initial concern came up, which I agree, if somebody's home burns down, they should be able to rebuild their home. But it's the ones in C2, I think, were the ones that were the major concern that we were talking about before. So I know there was a suggestion of a consideration within the notes of whether or not we would allow those very few examples. For example, if it were on Cleveland, I think 5 homes to be conforming use, or how you would make exceptions for those in particular. I think we're only talking about 5 homes that would be considered in the C2 area, though, not in R4.
And I was trying to respond to the question that was asked, but, and I do agree with Commissioner Kinney's comment there. If the C2 is what's being asked, and I think this is a legitimate concern. I spoke with one resident who brought this to my attention, and I encourage that individual to speak at the public hearing tonight on this topic. But in the C2 zone district, that 50% rule could apply to, it's probably a few more than 5. There's a couple of homes on Harrison by the park behind the filling station that are currently zone C2 that would need to be considered as well. But, you know, probably 6 to 10 existing residential homes in the C2 zone district that, as the code currently proposes, doesn't account for that as a conforming use, would fall into this nonconformities category. And I encourage that individual to come and speak at the public hearing, but my suggestion to them was our current code has a provision, the current code has a provision stating that those homes that were existing and legally in existence at the time the town changed the C2 zone district standards in 2016, those existing homes would be deemed conforming uses. I think a similar provision would be reasonable in the new proposed code. And I encourage them to ask for that at the public hearing. Staff would be supportive of something of that nature to protect those existing homes in these in the C2 zone district for this very situation.
Good. I want to come back to the thing about, you know, sometimes, and it seems like the ones you were suggesting is, and the way they laid the streets out here, well, they did the best they could with what was there. And so there is a lot of nonconformity that was sort of built in when they paved the streets. But in the case of, we talk about a nonconformity, I mean, you're probably talking about a setback. Now, if the building, I just want to clarify, because obviously there are the zoning codes and there's building codes. So if you, let's say 45% of your home was destroyed by a tree or fire or locusts, I don't know what, but the rest of the home, I think that would they not have to conform to the current electrical and plumbing codes when they rebuilt it, or would that still be grandfathered in? Because my understanding was that part was not. They would still have to upgrade their services, mechanicals, things like that.
Yeah, so you bring up a great point. The land use code that we're proposing for consideration tonight, this addresses uses of land, setbacks, the standards and limitations that we've defined in this code. This does not define the building code. So if a home is damaged to whatever percent and the owner is conducting work to repair that requires a permit, the repairs or changes to that home as a result of the damage would have to comply with the current building code. The building code is structured on life safety issues. So electrical would need to be, if it was an older electrical, hopefully no one has aluminum wiring anymore, but if they did in an older home, if they're changing the wiring to address those repairs, it would have to be brought into compliance with our current standards for electrical wiring.
Would that also include the areas of the home that were not in fact damaged? I mean, would that part be grandfathered in, or are we talking about you got to bring the entire structure up to compliance?
Right. So we would have to have a case-by-case basis look at that to see the extent of what's impacted. Generally speaking, a building permit is only applicable to that which you are touching. So if, say, a better example might be if in an older home, If 50% of the house was impacted by a tree limb falling on it, and those walls weren't insulated to current insulation standards, replacing those walls would have to be insulated with the current standard, but the older walls that weren't damaged would not have to be brought into compliance with the insulation requirement. The homeowner may choose to, in which case they could do that, but the building code would not require them to insulate walls that were not damaged. Electrical gets a little bit trickier because you have to follow that wire back to some point, and usually it goes back to the panel. And that can be a little bit different, but that is where it'd be a case by case basis.
Thank you for the clarifications. Yeah.
Thank you.
So if I heard you right, sounds like we've got 6 non-conforming structures on Cleveland. Something like that, 6 or 8.
Probably 6 to 10
6 to 10.
non-conforming.
And they're going to be exempt.
I think staff would be very supportive of that approach. You've got a limited number of those uses. They're already existing residential. So in an effort to protect those property owners' ability to rebuild their home in the event of damage, we think it's a very reasonable accommodation and something that would be easy to add into this code.
I think regardless of public comment, that's probably something that needs to appear in the code. Either way, everybody more or less agree, I think. I agree.
There
Yeah,
are
is that easy enough to draft in there, Cody?
Yeah, we probably, we'll work through the mechanics of that, but it would probably be a new line added in the use table that says existing residential uses in the C2 zone district, and then just add that as a permitted use under the R4. Well, I'll make sure that that works through the legality and mechanically of the code structure, but that's where we would probably place that.
Thank you.
That sounds pretty simple. Would there be any concerns or question how quickly that house is replaced or rebuilt or anything like that? Those are other things I think that we need to.
Hard one to call anymore.
I know it is, but I think that is a recommendation based off of adding a time frame or any other additional conditions. So I think something worth considering, but if it's as easy as adding it as a use within the table, I think that's fantastic. There's no reason why I would want anybody to not be able to rebuild their home. So that's never a question in my mind. So
What I would like to do, I think that we could put a time limitation on that. That is common. You see it in the chapter 7 for nonconformities. Putting is it 12 months or 18 months, something to that effect, to begin rebuilding is a reasonable consideration for a code requirement. If a structure got damaged and was then vacant for 15 years and someone came back and said, I'm ready to rebuild, I think they would have lost that non-conforming status. But I would like, if we could, since Mr. White's on the call tonight, if you wouldn't mind providing some context for best practices for time limitations on initiating rebuilding a structure under the non-conforming standards.
It ranges widely. I mean, a lot of communities, anywhere from 1 to 2 years. You could tie it to the life of a building permit, for example, because that's, and I don't know what that is under your current building code, but that's what you've probably deemed a reasonable time period for someone to initiate and complete construction for other structures. So that's maybe another consideration here. And, we could tie it to that. And if you want to give people more flexibility because it's their home and there's additional, I think there are additional considerations when you have that on the line, then, we could even give them more time than that. So, I mean, those are some things to consider, but those are, without actually diving in and reading hundreds of codes. I mean, my recollection is, a year or, the life of the building permit.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And so the comment there was maybe tying it to the time frame for a building permit. Building permits are valid for 180 days, which is 6 months. That seems pretty short to initiate rebuilding a home. And Mark's recollection was that, maybe a year to 2 years is reasonable for initiating, not saying completed, but initiating that process of rebuilding the home. Once initiated, then the building code comes into play and permits are valid for 180 days, subject to extensions for good reasons. So does a year feel right to start the process of rebuilding?
It could be. I can tell you just personally too, we're building right now. We're not building where you are, but I mean, even in the Kansas City area, it's hard to get contractors, et cetera. It's taking many, many months longer than we had been told originally. And so, I mean, there are things like that just to be reasonable with folks, we might consider. So, whether you think that's reasonable, I guess, from a land use perspective is, within the city's policy judgment, but you could give them a year, then maybe have a provision for extension. I mean, you can have by right extensions, maybe give them a 6 year by right extension and then maybe allow them to extend after, just because people do run into issues, as you know, during the construction process.
Does everyone on the commission agree with that? 2 years to initiate reconstruction?
Yes.
I'm going to say 2 years just due to insurance. I mean, if you think about your insurance policy, I believe when we had hail, we had the ability, it was 2 years to actually replace that roof. So, it might be an insurance issue or a weather issue. We can't dig that hole, until next spring. So I'd encourage 2 years.
Okay, I'm seeing some head nodding, so that's an easy enough
I
change. to make.
agree.
Just, Mr. Chairman, to remind you of time, it's about 6:15. I know you wanted to have a little break to let everyone stretch their legs between the meetings. So we're happy to keep going if there's other comments or questions regarding the revisions or other discussion from the planning commission.
I just had one quickly. I wanted to go back to the table of allowable uses quick. The pawn shop is still listed allowable, I believe, on C2 for Cleveland. Just take the temperature. If everybody is okay with it, I'm fine, but we kind of discussed allowable businesses and the grand vision for Cleveland Ave and what we want to see there. And I know there's a comment or a line in there about not allowing outdoor displays. They'd have to follow the same sign regulations as everybody else. But personally, to me, pawn shops don't belong on Cleveland. If everybody else says they do, that's fine. I would remove it and just disallow in C2. C1, C3, fine, industrial, fine, but it's not something personally I would want. Specifically pawn shops. This doesn't apply to any other businesses that aren't pawn shops that might look like them. This is a specific for a new build, new developed, new business coming in wanting to operate a pawn shop on Cleveland. I don't think it belongs personally. Thoughts? Anybody else?
What's the difference between a pawn shop and secondhand sales?
I was thinking that too about consignment. I think where you were going with that, Eric, and I agree. I mean, I think we saw that some pictures where we don't want necessarily lawnmowers and tools and equipment and stuff out on the sidewalk, 24/7. But I feel like, what's the difference between that pawn shop and that retail store or that secondhand store, consignment store?
Or auction?
Not auction. I'm not even going down that road.
Okay.
I'm not talking about the auction house.
We're talking new stuff.
Yeah, brand new,
All right.
new development.
Yeah.
New business wants to come in and put a sign up on Cleveland that says pawn shop.
Says pawn. Now, is that the difference? Is that what we're talking about?
I feel like it's part of it. There's a stigma to pawn shops. I mean, let's not deny it.
Yeah, so real quickly, if I could, I wanted to read the definition for pawn shop. We don't have a definition for secondhand sales and
No.
consignments and things of that nature. But that would generally fall into a retail category. It's a building, 4 walls, storefront, they're selling a product. It's generally going to fall under retail. Pawn shop, however, has a definition in chapter 9, and it's defined as any business that loans money
Loan
on
money.
deposit of personal property or deals in the purchase or possession of personal property on condition of selling that property back to the pledger or depositor. And so it's the exchange of money
Yeah.
and we're holding your product while you do this, and then we'll give it back to you with interest.
That's more justification not to.
No, I got it. I just wanted to clarify that, man.
Yeah.
That does change my mind.
Your definition, loaning money here.
So in context, I'm going to go back to the table of uses that Chairman Sarter pointed out. If I find the right page. But that, real quickly, the current proposal would allow pawn shops in currently as proposed in the C1, C2, and C3 commercial districts. I'm hearing a desire to remove it from the C2. Would you want to give any consideration to allowing it in light industrial?
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate. I just don't want to get into a situation where we disallow it to the point where we open ourselves up for legal action. But I don't think removing it from C2 and then allowing it in other commercial districts. And if that's even a little bit of a concern, then we can just swap out C2 for light industrial. And basically you're allowing more land use at that point. So I think that protects us a bit.
And I think that there would be adequate, at least from our current town zoning standpoint, I believe there would be adequate land area in the C3 and C1 zone districts. I threw it out there as seems like light industrial may be a suitable location for that nature of business as well. And so just wanted to at least provide some other context for consideration. Mark or Jen, any context on pawn shops or check cashing businesses usually fall into that similar category. One of the factors that I've seen worked into other codes in the past is requiring a minimum separation distance between certain types of businesses. And I've seen that for pawn shops or check cashing business, payday loan businesses, just so they don't have a proliferation of them all in one kind of centralized in one district and dominate that land use. Is that something that would be worthy of consideration?
I would think
Yes.
so.
Yeah, in fact, when I write these, I usually, pawn shops are part of a broader use category that would include payday lending and that sort of thing. And I had a comment too about the use table too, when you're done with this discussion
Okay, so,
elsewhere.
okay, thanks, Mark. We'll circle back to your comment
Okay.
on the use table. So for pawn shops, we'll remove from the C2 and consider separation distances. I think I would suggest probably if there is a setback distance between pawn shops or a similar business category, we may need to include the light industrial as a permitted land use to meet both zoning and buffers to provide that flexibility.
I think that's appropriate to allow light industrial as well.
Okay. Seeing a lot of head
Yeah.
nodding. Okay, thank you. We will draft that and propose that. Then Mr. White, if you could come back to your comment on the land use table, please.
Yeah, the one that jumped out at me just when I was skimming through the materials for tonight is under religious, the one for religious land use. It's conditional in C1, but community facilities are by right. I strongly recommend that religious land use be by right. We cannot treat religion on less than equal terms than other assembly uses under federal law. And so that either has to be a P, or they're both a C, or they're both gone. But treating it more restrictively raises other issues too, like substantial burdening and that sort of thing. But I very strongly recommend we make religious land use a P and C1.
I like by right. That's just me.
Okay.
In the C1.
Correct.
Any other comments on that? I think the consideration that was being looked at was lot sizes and availability for off-street parking.
Yeah.
But I totally understand what Mr. White's saying. So that's an easy change for us to make unless there's any other comments or questions on that. Okay, saw some head nods. We'll change that religious land use from conditional in C1 to permitted in C1.
Eric, before we take our break, are we going to be able to go into further discussion here? Or there's a couple more things. Or latitude.
Would it be helpful? I could describe the public hearing process and the regular session coming up.
Say everybody will have public hearing and there will be inevitably some discussion after public hearing, but probably best if we pertain it to the public hearing instead of introducing new topics. So
I think, yeah, I agree with Commissioner Sarter that you do need to have the opportunity to hear public comments and testimony. And then you can respond to those. If there are still additional subject matters that you would like to discuss, there is still time to do that following the public comments. Just one of the challenges you run into from a procedural process is if you're introducing something new that changes what someone's comment may have been, then you may want to consider either allowing that topic discussion to come back for further comment, or perhaps if it's a fairly short conversation, I think our individuals here, if it may pertain to them, may be interested in hearing that discussion first and then going to public comments.
Okay.
So I think you've got two options. You can request to do that before you open the public, the floor for public comments, which might be preferable to having the conversation after everyone has already spoken.
just do it now and skip the break.
I mean, I'm not sure the nature of your questions and the length of this possible discussion. I mean, can we extend, is it reasonable to extend the work session for another 10, 15 minutes? I don't know, or.
I kind of wanted to cover one more here that's been sticking its head up quite a bit. That's all.
For discussion and questions during the meeting.
Don't we? Yeah, don't we?
Yeah.
We actually
That
have.
before we go to the
Yeah.
public.
We'll do it then.
Okay.
I mean, we can do it that way, right?
Also, nothing stopping from anybody making multiple public comments, correct?
So
If we do get into a discussion, given the nature of what we're discussing, and it changes opinion or somebody wants to
Yeah.
add to it,
So procedurally, typically you would open the floor to public comments. You would receive all the public comments from those in attendance, and then you would close the public hearing. After the public hearing is closed, you wouldn't typically invite additional public comments to come back, but at the discretion of the chair, if there's a noticed recognized need that something has obviously needing further consideration, the chairman has the ability to reopen the public hearing for those comments. I think the cautionary tale would be public comment is an opportunity to tell the planning commission what residents and those in attendance may have on their minds. It is not for a back and forth dialogue.
Mhm.
So public comment should be comments received, and then the commission would deliberate. If you choose to reopen it, the same procedure would apply. Make your comments. Thank you for the comments, and then the commission could reconsider.
okay.
Could we just talk about it right now? I think we just go for it.
You want to go?
Anybody need a break?
Can we,
Take 5 minutes?
can we postpone the regular meeting by 5 or 10 minutes?
Is, I don't know what the subject matter is. How much time do you
I
feel?
wanted
you-
to I got a couple.
We're
of
gonna go.
questions.
Okay, let's do that.
I just wanted to go over this.
Yeah, we will. We'll do it.
I just wanted to go over this signage stuff real quick here.
Yeah.
Make sure we cover all the bases real quick.
Talk
Because,
about it.
Yeah, because, there's a difference between sign and banners, and banners covered in here. Or
Banners
because-
are signs.
Temporary
So we're
signs.
gonna make them, because sometimes these banners for activities and for things or for celebration, they're a little bit bigger than 2 foot by 3 foot. And need to be in order to get all the celebration on there and they hung, you know how they are, banners are hung out there. Are we is there consideration for any of that in here? Or,
So, yeah, so just to real quick, the clarification, banners fall under the temporary sign provisions of the proposed code. So any sign, banner, display is, if it's got messaging and content, it falls under the temporary sign code unless it's a permanent sign. So it's contemplated, but I think we've just defined the signage, including banners, to the same provisions equally, whether it's a yard sign, banner, et cetera.
Well, the reason why I bring it up, okay, we do a lot of events, we do a lot of things, and we put up all these banners out there that are from businesses or donation, donors and that sort of thing, and they're bigger than that.
Those are special events which don't fall into that, correct? That's what we discussed last meeting.
I think we can consider that. I was just scrolling to the section on signs and I need to get there, but there's a list of exemptions. And that's what I was going to take a closer look at. Sorry, I need to scroll a little further.
And we talked about exemptions for nonprofits and special events.
No, we
which didn't
can't
go
do
on the
that.
fence.
Yeah, we can't exempt
Basketball courts there.
nonprofits. No, we can't favor one user over another. So if that's an exemption, I think that was removed. We can't preference speech, we can't preference users. But we can have sort of a neutral temporary sign allowance. We can establish height and area. If you don't think the 8 feet tall and 32 square feet in the residential districts is big enough, we can adjust that.
What was that
We
size?
got- the RUR, we see those zones, those families of zones. I'm trying to remember what those are. Ag and R1. That's where it's, yeah, that's where it's 8 feet, 32 square feet per sign. It's 5 feet tall and 6 square feet per sign in the residential districts. And the commercial, and then the CID 8 feet and 32 square feet. You can have those up for 90 days at a time.
Can you repeat everything he said?
Yeah, it's in the table on page 5-62.
And the consideration that was looked at in establishing those, the larger signs were proposed to be allowed in the ag and R1 because larger lot sizes are typical along roads with higher vehicle speeds. And so when you're traveling at a higher rate of speed, you can't read a small sign as easily. The 6 square feet is typical of a residential yard sign because your traffic speeds are 30 miles per hour or less in those areas. You're closer to the yard than you might be where there's, a wider road right of way and buildings are set back further. So the proximity of the signs to the audience, which is traffic, and this rate of speed at which they're traveling were factors that suggested increasing the size for the larger lots. Same was true for community commercial and downtown commercial at 6 square feet because of the proximity and the speeds, as opposed to the commercial, the C3 zone and light industrial have a larger size sign allowed because they're larger properties further away from the roadway. So that was the factor that we considered in assigning those designations for sign size.
So the banners we're used to be seeing on Main Street would not be allowed then,
Or they'd be limited to 6 square feet.
which you can't get sponsors on something like that. So why bother?
But we talked about this before and we mentioned that on
We
the
did.
public was different, like our existing zoning for public.
Mark
was-
wasn't here at that meeting, so I don't know.
Well, I mean, we don't
We
have
did bring-
that.
we did bring that up.
We have 4 sections here, rural, residential, DCC, CID. Were we not intending to do one that was more related to like public plan use?
But
We
on the
have
right
not.
of way,
I think
Public
referring
right-of-way.
to like a park property or town hall,
Right,
public property.
because that's where those type of signs exist right now. Those are for special events. They're on the skate park fence.
Is that a limitation as well, Mark?
we Don't, the sign section doesn't apply to signs on state, federal, county, or town government,
That's where
school
we made
district
it.
property.
That was where we acknowledged that last time.
So you've got all the flexibility you want on that land.
Okay.
And that's something that, yeah.
Banners over Cleveland, the skate park fence,
Yeah,
town property.
Right.
That's what it was. Yeah.
that's what it was. Cause I was like, we had this discussion before
Yeah.
and then we're like, no, that's public property. So that's not done by. So I think that was the exception. So I'm sorry, because I was thinking through that as we were talking. Could you repeat that again about how that wouldn't apply to that use? Please, Mark?
Yes, this whole section 5.08
Uh-huh.
does not apply to signs erected, maintained, or displayed by the town government. So if it's on your property, this section doesn't apply. So you can make.
So
the
does
sign
that mean
bigger
if somebody were to put a
or sign-
banner on that fence, they would need to get approval from town hall?
If it's the town hall's fence, they would.
Which I've always wondered about that too, so.
Yeah,
Do we have any section? So nothing in this section applies to that then? Okay,
Correct.
okay.
Since why it was left out.
So there's probably something in there about approval for town property, is there? For a banner?
I was gonna say, any messaging being put on town-owned property would need the approval of the town.
Okay.
Whether it's through a special event process or otherwise, if the town was allowing a sign to be placed on public property, we would need to approve that.
Yeah, this is exactly the same conversation we had before. I remember this now.
Okay, so what if a business wants to put up a big advertising scheme for the weekend or something like that and have a banner out there bigger than 2 foot by 3 foot? Is that not acceptable?
Where are they putting it?
I don't know, right? Maybe over the entrance, over the garage door, over
Correct.
the sales, you know?
Correct, that's not acceptable.
It's not acceptable currently, right?
On a business's property,
Yeah.
they're allowed to have temporary signs on a business property to advertise, special events.
What size?
Which district?
That's what I was gonna ask him.
If it's going back to, this is the table on,
It's
Sorry, I'm
temporary
scrolling back
sign
and forth.
standards. It's page 5-62, table 5.008.9-3.
179 in the packet.
Right. And yes, well, they can put up a sign that says anything temporarily. It's just gotta be a temporary sign, whether they're
What
advertising or
size?
something else.
in the downtown commercial and the community, C1 and C2, they would have up to 6 square feet, 2 signs per street frontage. In the C3 commercial and light industrial, they could allow up to 32 square feet, 2 signs per street frontage.
On the chart on 171, wow, this is a little too loud. So DCC means downtown commercial core.
It's referencing a table up above, but it's inclusive of the downtown commercial and the community commercial zone districts.
Okay, so, but it does look like that, I'm just trying to think that, a lot of I would suggest most of the signs you see, I think Soul Squared has some exterior signage. I think Papa's Table has some exterior signage, which are banners. It sounds like none of those would conform because they would have to be the 6 square feet. Is that correct? Am I in
If-
those particular
If
uses
it's
areas?
the table on page 179 of your packet's referring to temporary signs. Permanent signs are in a different table.
But the ones you're talking about with Soul Square are on both ends of their fences.
Yeah.
And I don't remember what size those are.
Good,
They're
good.
close to 2 by 3, but they might be a little bit too big.
They're over.
Is it
Well, and
as
I'm
easy as
thinking-
just upping that to 32 as well? I mean, is a 4x8 sign really out of the realm for Cleveland Ave for a business to put up on a fence or on the front of their building temporarily?
I mean, if a business is having an open house or a grand opening or something like that, I think that we need to allow that to be a little more visible for our businesses as a temporary sign.
What sizes would be popular, Bert?
I mean,
I think it could be similar to what we have on the CID. And like Eric said, 32 square feet.
I mean, 32 square feet is pretty good sized banner.
Yeah.
Good size.
It's a $250 banner. I don't know, how many people want to put up a $250 banner for 3 days, or how long can they be up, a month?
90 days.
90 days. I mean, that's a huge banner. 3 by 6 is actually pretty good sized.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
6 square feet is not.
No, it isn't.
So I mean, if we meet in the middle, or like I said,
Up it a little bit.
I'd like to see that upped.
Okay.
I
Would
would
it be-
suggest 32. So if, who are we to, who are you to limit your customers from spending $250 per? You may as well shoot high, right?
Sales tax.
I mean, I don't know why a person can build half of that, 4 by 4, or, you know,
Yeah.
like 16 square feet.
16,
Probably does need to be increased.
5 by 20 is pretty good too.
There you go.
So I'm hearing a desire to, and is, so two questions that staff is gonna ask. We've got currently 2 categories assigned. We've got the downtown commercial and community commercial, and then we've got the C3 highway commercial, industrial and light industrial categories into 2 groups. The latter, C3 light industrial allows up to 32 square feet. Do you want to allow, and I heard an increase for the downtown commercial and the community commercial. Do you want that to be 16 square feet? Do you want it to be 32 square feet? We can, it's just a number to change, right? That's an easy change for us to make. We just need direction on how big you want to allow that.
I'd almost like to see it be similar. And then even the manual board reader, I mean, I feel like they should be somewhat the same.
The manual board reader is a little bit different category than a temporary sign.
Oh, I'm sorry, not manual, the illuminated. That's what I'm talking about.
Oh,
The similar, sorry, was on the wrong line, illuminated. So, there could be, an illuminated sign. Maybe could we put I don't know, a size limit on that, but
So.
we don't
in-
want it to look like a big casino town as you go through Main Street, but I don't see some harm in some sort of illuminated signs down Main Street.
And just to be clear, in the table on page 179 of the code is referring to temporary signs, which we're not proposing allowing illumination on a temporary sign.
Yeah.
But the table up above for permanent signs does allow illumination.
Thank you.
Well, I was going to say, we were sort of answering the question about size. Could we? This seems like a little different topic. So if we could kind of give Cody and Mr. Bird an answer, would be probably good. I mean, is it 32? Is it 20? I mean, is it bigger than 6? I'm thinking we're deciding 6 is probably too small. And the question is 32 too big?
I think 32 is too big, because if we're 2 on each street face and the majority of the businesses, for example, on Main Street, they're only like 25 feet wide.
You're gonna try and put a 4 by 8 banner on any of the buildings. It can be done, but it's fairly difficult
Yeah.
to get it to stay up for 90 days. It's gonna blow off.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can tell people they can do 32 square feet, but I don't think many people are gonna do it.
That's been my experience from the administrative side of it. Oftentimes when you allow a sign size these are for temporary signs, that size of sign, you get into challenges with where do you locate it? You think about the downtown corridor specifically, it's not going to be staked in the yard. They're not going to be planting posts in the sidewalk. They won't be allowed to tie it between trees or street lights. So you're talking about probably banners.
Yeah.
There's already a provision for sandwich board signs. So you're talking about banners, and the larger signs, and this is from my past experience, when you allow those larger signs, they usually run into issues with, well, we don't want to cover up our windows.
Mhm.
We can't cover up our door. And they do run out of places where they can put a sign that size. I think, and someone mentioned also that the current proposal is structured in a way that would allow that additional square footage for signs per street frontage. So the intent was, a mid-block business could have up to 2 additional signs, 6 square feet, to put maybe on either side of the door to advertise an event.
Mhm.
And if you're on a corner, you could put those same 2 signs on your front and on your side wall to catch the side street traffic attention.
Mhm.
So that was kind of the intent. I wanted to point all that out, and some past, I guess I'll throw out there, the only other thing that I've run into that has been a limiting factor is when you're anchoring banners with grommets to a building wall, you have to penetrate the wall. And a lot of business owners figure out, I don't want to put holes in my wall. And they come back and look for other alternatives, and it's usually a little bit smaller. But that aside, I think allowing an increase might be possible here. I would encourage you to consider that under the context of the number per street frontage and if that makes a difference. So mid blocks would be allowed 2 additional signs because they have 1 street frontage. Corner lots would be allowed up to 4 additional signs because they've got 2 street frontages.
Well, I guess I would suggest anywhere. I mean, I think 32 is too big. 16 to 12, I mean, 16 would be 2 foot by 8 feet. It's a pretty good size sign. If you wanted to put it on your fence, I mean, does that seem reasonable to other commissioners, or I'll
Good
pick
with
another
that.
number?
I'm good with 16, just a little bit more here. Configure it any way you want. 1 by 16.
You could be
2 by
3
8,
by
4
6 would be
by 4.
18.
Yeah, it's that more common size, I assume.
Or, and I guess I can throw this out there, not to muddy the water, but do you say 1 additional sign per street frontage up to a maximum of 32 square feet? So if you've got a wall that would accommodate a larger sign, you could place it there. And if you don't have the space to do that because of windows, doors, or other configuration, you could break that square footage up into
Sure.
2 different signs as,
Sure.
or any number of signs, as long as it meets the maximum square footage
Yeah.
allotment.
I like that.
That works.
I like that.
It allows flexibility, but still has a limit to the total area.
I like that.
So your language will be in terms of square footage, not in terms of number.
We would probably, my suggestion would be instead of 2 per street frontage, to reduce that to 1 per street frontage, but allow up to a maximum of 32 square feet of total sign temporary area.
Okay.
But you said you could bust it up and just make sure you don't go over 32.
Yeah, so if you want to have 2 16 square foot signs on either side of your door, that would be fine. And so we would just need them to, and it'll be a little bit more onerous for
And
staff
corner
to,
lots are up to 4.
I would propose changing that to 2.
Yeah.
So it'd be 1 per street frontage, so 1 on the front along Cleveland and 1 on the side street, up to a maximum of 32 square feet on both frontages.
I like that.
All right.
Mark, following what I kind of threw out there, do you see any challenges with proposing that sort of flexibility?
No, this is the kind of thing where local knowledge is extremely valuable, and I think we've gotten that. So what if you have 1 frontage, Cody? You're allowing just 1 sign up to 32 square feet?
I think
If you're
the
in
idea was
mid-block?
still, I'm sorry, Mark, I was speaking over you.
So if you're mid-block, you've only got 1 frontage. You only get you get 32 square feet. If you're a corner lot, then you get 2 up to 32 square feet per
Yeah.
frontage. So you can get 64 square feet because you got.
You could
1
have
per
2 on the
frontage.
frontage up to 32 square feet.
Yeah,
So 2 by 18 banners.
right. Mark, I think you're correct in that we would.
Yeah, I think
not
that's how.
limiting not limiting the number of signs, but limiting the total square foot area per street frontage to 32 square feet. But I think maybe where you're going is that a corner lot would not be allowed to put all 64 square feet on one side. That the limitation would be 32 square feet per side.
Yeah. Well, I meant yeah, that the lot would have 64 square feet. But I don't think it matters because the person can only see 32 at a time. So I think
Correct.
we've controlled clutter sufficiently. But I'm just trying to be clear about what you're proposing when we write it, that you get 32 square feet of signs per frontage, and you're saying no limit on the number?
I believe that's correct. I mean,
Okay.
I know that could be a challenge if someone proposed 32 signs, 1 square foot apiece, but I think your messaging content gets lost in that.
Yes,
Um,
I've seen stranger things than that.
Yeah, I know that the sign industry is extremely creative.
1 square foot per
Right.
letter.
Well, I mean, the purpose of the sign is to draw attention
That's
to your
funny.
business. And so if you if you're too weird about it, nobody's going to know what you're trying to do. So I think most businesses have an incentive to provide signs that are clear and attractive and that sort of thing. Otherwise, nobody knows who they are. So,
Uh,
yeah.
Sorry, Mark, I think some of the members in the room are having a little bit hard time hearing you, so I just wanted to repeat a part of that.
Okay.
What Mark was saying was that inherent to businesses and trying to display their message, they have a vested interest in making sure that the sign is attractive and readable to relay that message content. So although there could be a lot of creativity with, 32 1 square foot signs, the message may not be readable at that point and it's not conveying the message. So I think businesses would be reasonable to make their sign attractive and readable.
So where did we land?
What the,
You had it earlier.
Okay,
One more time.
the direction that I heard was to modify or revise the draft code to state that in the downtown commercial and C1 commercial allow up to a maximum of 32 square feet per street frontage.
Street frontage.
And I think in doing so, we would also match for the highway commercial, the 1 per street frontage instead of the 2 per street frontage, unless you don't feel that's appropriate, just for consistency across those districts.
I think that's a good idea.
The way you're writing that, would that allow a 4x8 sign then?
Yes.
Okay. Or bigger than that, actually. Okay, good.
Good?
Good.
Oh, boy, good work. Well, I'm glad you brought it up.
Well, what's going to go away? I can tell you that.
Anybody have anything else for right now? All right, everybody here, thank you guys for allowing that extra time for us. We'll go ahead and still take 5 minutes and then we'll start the regular session when we adjourn. We'll start up. Cool. All right, everyone, I got a couple seconds till 7. We're gonna go ahead and get started with the regular meeting portion. Got 7. All right, we'll go ahead and call to order the regular meeting of the Planning Commission at 7 o'clock. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Knack? Keeney? Caffrey?
Present.
Friedrichs? Whitehouse?
Here.
Hammond?
Here.
Sarter?
Here. Any additions or deletions from the agenda?
And from staff.
Staff. All right, public forum. This is non-agenda public forum. So if anybody has any comments not related to land use tonight, this is the appropriate time. Okay, doesn't look like there are any. Consideration of minutes from the February meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from February?
I move we approve the minutes from the February meeting.
Okay, Bert, I'll second.
Roll call.
Commissioner Knack?
Yeah, yes.
Keeney?
Yes.
Caffrey?
Yes.
Friedrichs? Whitehouse?
Yes.
Hammond?
Yes.
Sarter?
Yes. Okay, our new business tonight, it's a public hearing. We're going to consider the adoption of the land use code. We're going to go ahead and start with Cody. He's just got a few words to say again to kind of reiterate the process and catch us up tonight, and then we will open it up for public comments. So, Mr. Byrd.
Thank you, Chairman Sarter. Cody Bird, Town Planning Director. Wanted to kind of highlight kind of the process of the land use code adoption. I want to take a step back. Didn't realize you couldn't see me on the, maybe I'll come to the podium. You on the screen. Let me start over. So Cody Bird, Planning Director for the town. Just wanted to highlight kind of the process by which we're reaching consideration of the land use code tonight. The town started this process nearly 2 years ago, maybe a little longer than 2 years ago, when we actually went through the process of getting budget for undertaking a comprehensive plan update and a land use code update. So the town did adopt updates to our comprehensive plan on August 2nd, 2021. Since that time and before that time, the commission has been working on drafting regulations that are in our land use code. So that's annexation, subdivision, and zoning. And the intent of updating those regulations is to achieve the vision that was outlined in the comprehensive plan, to modernize our code. Just for background purposes. In 2007, the town adopted the Colorado Model Land Use Code with almost no local changes. Model codes don't address local context. So we're bringing this code up to a Wellington local standard, as well as addressing some legal compliance matters, consistency, applicability, changes to technology, and changes to development patterns over time. This has been a complete overhaul of the land use code, as opposed to just a specific revision to a section. We chose to do it that way because there were multiple sections that needed a whole lot of attention, such as our sign code. We've come a long way since August, when the Planning Commission really started to dive into the draft language in earnest. In your Planning Commission packet, you can see there was a table of when these subject matters were kind of rolled out. The Planning Commission's been meeting in work sessions every month since August and September. And so this group has done a lot of work to consider and prepare these draft codes that are being presented to you tonight. I wanted to take a few minutes to and explain, I guess let me finish a thought real quick. So the town did the comprehensive plan update. We're currently considering the land use code updates. And there's one additional step that will take place after adoption of land use codes, and that's the adoption of the official zoning map. So this map on the wall over here hasn't been updated in a number of years, except for a few new properties that were brought into the town and zoned through annexation. But we need to update this map as well. The reason this zoning map needs to be updated is because this specifically identifies which parcels the provisions of the land use code apply to. So the typical process is to adopt a land use code that identifies your districts and the regulations applicable to those districts. Then you define on a parcel by parcel basis, these are the properties to which that land use code should apply. So that additional step is not being considered tonight. This is just the legislative act of considering the land use code regulations. So I wanted to highlight too, and I appreciate everyone's patience because I know we started a little late tonight, but the commission just conducted a work session on the revisions to the draft land use code. The draft was put out beginning of February. It's been available on the town's website for public comments. We have received public comments in writing via emails and our online response format. And those public comments that the town staff has received have been compiled and included in your agenda packet. There were a couple of themes that came out of that public comment collection, and I want to just highlight those real quickly. Many of us are here that were also involved in the work session, including members of the audience who may want to comment. But I wanted to quickly summarize kind of what we discussed. The C2 and R4 zone districts regarding downtown businesses and downtown neighborhoods have been a topic of discussion for quite some time, including in the comprehensive plan. And in the comprehensive plan process, we heard a lot of comments regarding preserving the residential character and the nature, the historic cultural values of these residential neighborhoods, particularly along Harrison and McKinley. And the future land use map in the comprehensive plan had identified Harrison and McKinley as areas that could transition to allow business uses over time. We heard pretty strongly during the comprehensive plan, and we're hearing that again in the land use code process, that the neighbors and residents of those corridors don't desire that right now. And so through the process of the land use code, we've concluded and recommended as a staff, the Planning Commission just discussed this in the work session a moment ago, that it's probably preferable to zone those properties along Harrison McKinley, the R4 zone district that is contemplated in the land use code, which is primarily residential and allowing a very limited number of business or commercial opportunities only through a conditional use approval process. So staff felt like this was a really good step forward in recognizing and preserving the downtown residents, and particularly in those two corridors along Harrison and McKinley Avenue. The other comments we received from the public were pertaining to the land use code, the landscape standards and the landscape standards and where they were applicable. Some of those comments were questioning why there were standards being proposed for homeowners and that they didn't desire to be subject to those. And that was never the intent of the code and the landscape section, but rather it was intended for to be applicable to new developments, new commercial, new multifamily developments, that they would be subject to the landscape standards that are proposed in this code with an emphasis on water conservation. And then last, and we overran a little bit discussing the sign code. We had several public comments questioning why there were certain limitations to signs. We heard from the commission in a prior work session that there was a desire to add additional signage for businesses. And working through that, staff had proposed increasing the number of temporary signs allowed on residential properties, adding the ability to display additional signs during a special event, or not a special event necessarily, but an event, whether it's a celebration, an election, or et cetera. And we just worked through another element there with, making sure there's adequate temporary signage for downtown businesses, aside from just a sandwich board sign on the sidewalk, but allowing some wall signs as well. So those were the kind of the highlighted sections for what we were receiving public comments on. A couple of other things I did want to highlight for kind of changes. We get a lot of, as a staff, we get a lot of questions and concerns from residents of the old town areas that aren't in new subdivisions with HOA standards. And a lot of those questions come back to, I've got a small lot to begin with. I've got existing structures. I need to add a detached garage or a shed or some other provision, and I don't have space to do it. And that's a challenge that we unfortunately can't create additional space for them. But what we did propose was to reduce the side yard setbacks from 7 feet to 5 feet to allow some additional flexibility for the downtown neighbors to place those structures. Just as a kind of a staff consideration there, we do want to keep the 5 foot minimum because that allows 5 foot on one side of the property line and 5 foot on the other, still maintains the 10-foot fire separation between structures. So we don't want to reduce it to less than that, but we were comfortable bringing it in a little bit and giving as much flexibility as we reasonably could to those property owners in the old town districts. So that was an important consideration. We did also dial back a lot of the density suggestions that were originally came out of the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan contemplated density ranges for these categories. Our current code allows more than the comprehensive plan had originally recommended. And so we've pulled that back a little bit through the comprehensive plan, and we've pulled it back again to not allow as high a density in our zone districts as part of this proposed land use code update. So that was a consideration that we made. We also proposed increasing the minimum lot size from 6,500 square feet to 7,500 square feet to make sure that properties with new houses being built on them have room to expand those additional additions or adding a detached structure and still meeting their setbacks. That will also limit the density somewhat by having a larger lot size for those new subdivisions. So I wanted to highlight those couple of changes and tie it back to the comprehensive plan and bring the land use code into how we achieve those desires and visions. So those are kind of highlights. Tonight, we do have a public hearing advertised. So as soon as I'm done here and after the commission has any questions for me that are high level, we'll allow some public comment. The chairman will take over the public comment portion of the meeting. But I did want to recognize as part of this process, there will be an additional public hearing before the Board of Trustees. They will consider any recommendations the Planning Commission makes, and the Board of Trustees makes the ultimate approval on the land use code adoption process. So that being said, we recognize in the draft code, that there's still some cleanup that needs to happen from a formatting, typographical errors. I've noticed a couple of ors that should have been ofs that spell check doesn't catch. We want to check for clarity and consistency. We've heard from our Public Works Division that reviewed a couple of these sections that there were some things that they would like to clean up as well, just for consistency with some of our other engineering standards. So we need to incorporate those changes as well. But those are not substantive items that the Planning Commission would have purview over, or that the board would have purview over any engineering standards. So we're comfortable in recommending those changes because they'll be minor in nature and non-substantive from a land use standpoint, to make those changes and corrections and present them to the Board of Trustees. But I wanted to specifically highlight that tonight because we are aware of a few changes that we still need to make just to get this document polished up and ready for a final. So that being said, what we would ask is if the Planning Commission is ready to forward recommendations to the Board of Trustees, if you could understand that we're still going to make some of those clerical technical changes that are non-substantive and non-Planning Commission purview. I'd be happy to stand for any questions regarding the proposed draft or the process. And if there are no questions, then I would hand it over to the chairman for public comments.
I had a question. So is tomorrow night, so the Board of Trustees will be looking at this. Is that in fact a public hearing, or where public comment is taken? I mean, like, this is a public hearing. Is that the same thing on the board level, or does that happen at another date further down? Could you clarify that, please?
Absolutely. And thank you for the question. That's a very good difference to distinguish. On the agenda for the Board of Trustees tomorrow night is presentation of the draft land use code. In the board's agenda packet is the exact same draft version that was in the Planning Commission packets tonight. Tomorrow night for the Board of Trustees is a presentation. This is the document that was compiled. It's the second draft or the revision draft. And we're presenting that so that the Board of Trustees has plenty of time to read and consider what is being presented to them. It is not a public hearing. The mayor in that meeting may choose to allow public comments if he desires. I'd also point out that the Board of Trustees is planning to have a work session on the 15th of this month to discuss the land use code in a work session. And the public hearing for the Board of Trustees is advertised for the March 22nd meeting. So March 22nd is the official public hearing advertised for the Board of Trustees.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over.
I got one. If
please.
that's okay. So Cody, just talk about this a little bit, clarify this. 1.06 is the relationship between the comp plan and the land use code. And, you know, we all always been saying that the comp plan is a vision, right? Vision statement kind of thing, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
And then in this thing, and this was brought up before, and I think it's just something for clarification. And I don't know that I had a problem with it at all. But it does say in this thing that the comprehensive plan is the official policy document. And can you explain that a little bit? Does that mean anything?
Yeah, so, and the town attorney clarified this, and I won't be able to say it as eloquently as he did at the Board of Trustees meeting, but the comprehensive plan is a guiding visionary document for the town. It's what we foresee the town becoming or possibly becoming in the next 20 to 40 years. It is not a regulatory document. The town attorney in the Board of Trustees meeting, when the similar question came up, clarified that the Board of Trustees adopted a resolution ratifying the Planning Commission's adoption of the comprehensive plan as the official policy document of the town. And so I believe the answer is both. The comprehensive plan is a guiding document. The board ratified adoption of the comprehensive plan, signifying it recognized that plan as a policy of the town.
Okay.
And to that extent, I'm not an attorney, and I would not speculate on the definition of what is a policy document as it pertains to the Board of Trustees' role in defining legislative actions in the land use code.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, Chairman Starter, I'll turn it over to you and feel free to reach out to staff if you have any questions on procedure.
Thank you, Mr. Byrd. All right, we will start the public comments. Anybody interested in making public comments, just come on up to the podium, state your name and address if you would. Public comments are limited to 3 minutes. Patty does have a clock running and she'll just give me a time. If there's more to say and you're not quite wrapped up, the commission can extend your time if we feel necessary.
Sherelle Teets, 4525 Ingalls Drive. So thank you for allowing us to speak. I have multiple questions and just some statements and comments from getting to talk to some of the people on the outskirts of town over the last few weeks that are included in the new comp plan color code section that we're not aware that they were even had a projected thought on being included. So your C1, C2, C3, that is where you were discussing just in your work session about churches and that you allowed in C1, but it did not get added in C2. That is your river of life. That is your filling station. That is the youth area from the river of life. That's a huge issue if you guys are planning on writing that out of that area. So that is definitely something I would suggest looking into. Our churches, they do a lot for our community. So the other one that I really kind of have a silly comment on, the signs, honestly, I was telling John outside, does it really matter if it's a 32-foot sign or at the end of the day, what someone wants to do with their own property should be their choice and their right. I will say there was discussion on hanging those larger signs to the buildings. So coming with an electrical background and experience, when you're installing lighted signs on historic buildings, you're going to have a massive issue trying to get that sign installed while still upholding the integrity of the brick that you're drilling into. So those banners probably provide a way to advertise businesses' names without having to go through extremely costly installs on the electrical aspect of things. So definitely something to note. Not that I don't love buying large banners, but I think that that's so Papa's Table, they've had a banner out there for years and it's a very large one and that has been their sign. So as far as the cost, I know that there was a question that came up on electrical when a home burns down or a percentage of a home burns down. Absolutely, electricians cannot tie into existing wires. That has to be installed from point A to point B. And there was actually 12 homes that fell under the R4 district. And the County Road 64 and County Road 9 in your comp plan, it is not listed as being really, it's commercial right now. And it's getting ready to switch over to residential, but there is a commercial business there right now. It's Cannonball Storage.
Just as you're taking a break, Ms. Dietz, you're at 3 minutes. So are you
Got
able
it.
to wrap up
So
very
one more
quickly?
thing, because I know Planning Commission has a little bit to do with the traffic circle that's getting ready to go in over by, because you deal with the planning aspect of it, right? When your guys walk through that.
We can address your questions at the end. So
Got
I'm
it.
sure Cody's taking notes on this. So we'll.
Okay, so as far as the traffic circle goes, a lot of that land is farmland on the west side of County Road 9. That traffic circle does not allow combines to actually go through those circles. And you have farmers that are up further north that depend on equipment that is down by the south side of town that cannot access the other side of that if you put a traffic circle in.
Thank you, Ms. Dietz. Appreciate it. Anyone else?
Good, excuse me, good evening, Planning Commission, John Gator, 8142 4th Street. I did want to start off by thanking you for giving direction to the staff regarding the non-conforming uses. My home is one of those non-conforming uses. And as the town code currently reads, if a fire were to happen or my home were to be damaged beyond 50%, I would not be able to rebuild my home. And on top of that, there would be things that could also, if there were major repairs needed on my home, I'd have to have approval by a public official. And there's a lot within that. So I appreciate the direction on that. I did also want to comment, we do have multiple, at least 2, I think, locations that are religious use that are currently in C2. And I would encourage the Planning Commission to consider adding something regarding those existing land uses so that those do not become non-conforming, because they would face some of the same challenges as the homeowners on that. I also did want to thank you for your thoughts on the sign code. I do have a lot of concerns with just how restrictive our sign code is. It's people's private property, excuse me. And it specifically calls out in the code that we as the town are not required to abide by any of those rules. So it does cause me some heartburn when we as the town are putting rules on our residents that we are not required to follow ourselves. And so I think we should be less restrictive on that. So I do thank you for your working towards that. I also did want to recommend, I appreciate the thoughts of adding the downtown neighborhoods to R4. What I would recommend is that we work to approve the land use code and the zoning map at the same time. So we get to an ideal land use code, but we hold on approving that until we also have what that land use zoning map would look like. The reason being is a lot of what has been told to those residents of the downtown neighborhoods is that we'll get to this in this next step. We'll get to this as this next step, and each next step, it doesn't get addressed. I'm hearing we're going to address it. That's great to hear, but I'd really like us to see us do these together versus doing one, and then down the road, we might have a different planning commission, a different board of trustees. We might wind up with another different zoning map that doesn't reflect what we told the residents. So I have a concern with that. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is our current in addressing the comprehensive plan as a policy document. And I'm just going to read to you what was actually put before the Board of Trustees. And this is a portion of it. Whereas the comprehensive plan as adopted by the Planning Commission is the official master plan of the town of Wellington and serves as an advisory document to guide land development decisions and physical development of the town. And whereas the Board of Trustees of the town of Wellington desires to ratify the Planning Commission's adoption of the comprehensive plan in 2021, now therefore be it resolved by the Board of Trustees of the town of Wellington, Colorado as follows. The Board of Trustees hereby ratifies the decision of the Planning Commission adopting the Wellington Comprehensive Plan 2021 as the official master plan of the town of Wellington. There's nothing in there about it being a policy document, about it being a regulatory document. I have a major issue with that being put in there as a policy document because the land use code is a regulatory policy document. So it's a major concern to me that we're changing that to a policy document. The final thing, because I know my time is up, is the other concern I have is just with our size of lots. I know a great point was brought up on one of our Board of Trustees meetings recently about affordable housing and how it's a major concern. One of the concerns I have with a lot of the restrictions we're putting in place on new builds is a lot of these aren't going to make homes less expensive. And one of the keys with that is our smallest residential lots are 3,000 square feet. There are some developers that build small single family homes, but those lots are about 2,400 square feet. Those developers wouldn't even look at Wellington because we don't support lots small enough to support that. So if we're truly concerned about inexpensive housing that's not apartments or things like that, I think we need to look at addressing that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Gator.
Lisa Cholet, 7424 Homestretch Drive. I don't want to reiterate much of what anybody said, but I do want to make a suggestion kind of off of what John was saying. I was looking at setbacks. Well, they don't really say setbacks in the land use code now. They just minimum side yards and things like that in light of the Marshall fire. And I work in construction, would highly encourage you to, yes, smaller lot sizes so that we can still provide affordable housing. I have a fairly large lot and my lot is not 7,500 square feet. So, but I would encourage you to do smaller lot sizes with set minimum setbacks that are at least 10 feet from the property line and encourage, what's the word I'm looking for? Flame resistant, fire resistant exterior materials on any new residential builds that we do so that we don't find ourselves in that kind of a position. I want us to be able to offer affordable houses, but I don't want our whole town to burn up either. And we get winds way worse than what happened that day. So that would be my biggest suggestion, is just, I get that we want to give people space, but I think there's some ways that we can do it that may limit the size of a house, but that's okay because those are the ones that you can put in that are a little bit more affordable. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Shirley.
Are you stealing pens?
Hi, Karen Eifert. I live in the Knolls. When I was listening to the Planning Commission, Corey, you were speaking, like, I don't know if I'm supposed to say his name or not, but anyway, during the commission, you were talking about the work commission meeting. You were talking about the areas that have certain businesses, and I might say this wrong, but down in the C2 and R4 that you were going to allow and not other types of businesses like the pawn shop you guys were talking about. But I wanted to reiterate what I said before, is that something needs to be put in there that you can't just say just those businesses. There's also a protected community that you cannot exclude from that area. And that would be like group homes and day programs for individuals with developmental and intellectual disabilities. And there has to be an approval from the town for that protected population that are federally protected. You cannot exclude them from that area. So I'd encourage this board to look at that land use code and make sure that you're not excluding that protected population under federal guidance. And then I also wanted to just, you gave the description of what the comp plan is here at the podium at the beginning of this, and a whole bunch of us in the audience were like, huh? Because you didn't really give an answer. Is it a policy or is it a master plan? What is it? We'd really like to have an actual answer to that. Thanks.
Would you mind restating your name, please?
Karen Eifert.
Thank you.
I'm Kathy Dallas. I live on 3405 Revere Court. And I've really enjoyed this discussion of the points that the mayor brought up, and a lot of Commissioner Knack and Commissioner McCaffrey. They were spot on, especially last time with the what if a house burns down in one of these areas where they can't rebuild it. So I'm really encouraged. I had a couple of things on the, one of the things was just brought up by Lisa Cholette, but that the minimum distance has been crossed out in that on a chart on page 77. And I thought that was a fire safety issue, but maybe it's covered by setbacks or something now. But that whole entire line was just, everybody just, it was just checked off. One of my husband's a large animal veterinarian. He's an ambulatory vet. We work out of our truck. So we don't have a clinic. But reading through this, I questioned where best practices came from. Is there some sort of best practice Bible or book or encyclopedia? Because reading the large animal vet things was just nuts. there was, property has to be 1 acre, but then you had to be at least 100 feet away from any property line to do anything outside with an animal. Well, 1 acre is 100 feet by 430 feet, or if it's square, 208 by 208 feet. There's no way you could do anything 100 feet away from any property line. So anyhow, and then a lot of the other things were just absolutely ridiculous also. I mean, the decibel level for, these are already excluded from every part of town except for industrial and rural. So it shouldn't be an issue about sound and smells and things like that. And it's just been, I mean, it got me to look up to see how big an acre actually was and decibel levels. A vacuum cleaner is 75 decibels, but you can't have a donkey or a cow out there hitting 65 decibels without being against the rules here. The animals are prohibited from being outside at night. It's like, these are outside animals. So anyhow, my question is, this is all I know about. I don't know about warehouses. I don't know about heavy equipment. But if the best practices for the large animal vet stuff are so out of whack, I wish people who knew about some of these other areas would really look into it and make sure that it's the same. Kennels, which make a lot more racket than veterinary places, that they don't have the same acreage or setback stuff. And also for the small animal one, there were things that were contradictory. They said you have to have a completely enclosed soundproof building, but you have to reduce the sound coming from the facilities to a level of 65 decibels at the property lines. It's like, okay. There were just some little contradictions like that that don't make sense, that people, I don't know, it just makes me not have a lot of, I don't know. I don't know, can't think what I wanted to say about that. It gives me less confidence in some of the descriptions of the businesses, just because of what I know about the one business. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Whitehouse.
Christine Gator, Downtown Core. Thank you, Cody, for making those recommendations for R4. Thank you for the signs. Thank you for a lot of the things that you guys have changed. I'm on the Parks Board, and Cody came to us and asked our advice on open space and landscape. And I didn't see the suggestion that the Parks Board made in the change. And the suggestion was that HOAs take care of the neighborhood parks that towns don't use for rec programs. And I didn't see that in there. And also Dean did not like pocket parks. So taking that out as a requirement, because he doesn't want to mow any more pocket parks. They're too hard to mow. So those are two things that were talked about in the Parks Board that I didn't see changed. And then on page 2-10, number 2.05.03, it talks about how to amend the land use code. And it says at the request of the Planning Commission, but the mayor was saying that he wants the next board to amend the land use if they see fit. Well, according to this, they can't. It's only the Planning Commission is the only thing allowed to amend, to request an application to be done by Cody. And so I think it needs to be changed to say that the amendment can be requested by the Board of Trustees and the Planning Commission so that needs to be changed so that the next board, if they do want to make a change, they're allowed to. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Gator.
Karen Eifert again. I live in the Knolls.
Ms. Eifert, just one at a time, please. We've got one behind you.
Oh, I thought I looked around. I didn't see
Yep.
him. Sorry.
You're okay.
You go first.
Wyatt Schwindeman Curtis downtown. I'm one of the candidates running for mayor, and one of the things that I'm Kathy White Ellis actually reminded me of this as I was thinking about it. One of the things that I am constantly asked about when I'm talking to the community right now is goats. So I don't know if that is in the land use code, but I think it'd be really cool to have some goats down here. That's all I got.
I don't know whether to thank you or not, Wyatt. I'm not sure where to go with that one. Ms. Seifert, if you have something quickly, we'll allow one more quick comment.
Karen Eifert, I live in the Knolls. This is kind of on the other piece I was talking about that protected population. I see on, I'm not good at reading where it is in the document, but I'll try. It says page 16 and it says, I don't see any numbers next to it to tell you where it is. Anyway, it says section B, the home occupation shall not include the following. And it gives the animal hospital, long-term care facility, residential, bed and breakfast, and then it says group home. So I am really concerned about that. There's a lot of host homes up here that are taking care of that protected population. So I would really like to know if there's clarification between group home and host home providers. And if you're going to exclude that from residential, there's going to be a big fight about that because that is federally mandated. I'm paid by the state of Colorado to take care of my son, not until he's 18, sorry, to take care of my brother, who's an adult. And that is to be able to reduce the amount of group homes that are in the state of Colorado. They're trying to go to host homes so we don't have the larger group homes and they get the individual care that they need. And I think that should be a priority for the town of Wellington to put it into the code where we can have that. And if you're saying we're excluded from residential areas, then that's going against what the federally mandate is, and it's going against the laws as well, saying that we can be in residential neighborhoods. So something needs to be written into this code to define group home and host home. And you can't take host homes out of residential areas because then you'll have a humongous legal battle. I'll be the lead. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, can I address that now?
Absolutely, Ms. Berg.
Ms. Seifert, that's not what's recommended. And in the code on the draft code on page 85 of the packet it's at the very top of the page. It's group home and it's proposed as permitted use in R1, R2, R3, and R4, which is all of our residential categories. The only one it does not include is manufactured homes. And we will take a double check on that to make sure that in a manufactured home district, if that is a legally permissible use, then we will verify that for you.
For host home?
For a manufactured home district. Host homes are.
Sorry, I came from California when I was real little, so manufactured means all the neighborhoods. So I don't know what you mean by manufactured.
Yeah, so manufactured home district is referring to a subdivision that's laid out to accommodate multiple manufactured homes on slips or parcels with shared access, shared community facilities, et cetera, not specifically to the housing type. Manufactured homes are allowed in our residential districts, and so are group homes and host homes. So your concern has been addressed that group homes and host homes are allowed as permitted uses in all of our residential categories, and we will verify if a manufactured home district specifically laid out for manufactured homes would also need to be included in that.
Oh, okay. They got it. All right, thank you. What is a manufactured home? Sorry.
Sorry, a more specific term, but thank you for the clarification. Someone mentioned mobile home park is another term. Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to address that.
Of course, I'm glad you did. Okay, we can continue with public comment if anyone else wants to come up. And if not,
this is sort of the, there's a chart on page 17 that says that if you have a variance, you need to go, to the Planning Commission, and then there'll be a decision made at the Board of Adjustments. But when you go to that section, which is, I think it was 222 or something like that, the whole Planning Commission was struck out. So I don't know if that was a, if just say we need to change the chart or add that planning commission part back in, it just doesn't make sense. And there was some others, another one where, the condo and townhouse plat can be okayed by the staff and not go to planning commission. That didn't make any sense to me. It made it seem like if you want to build an apartment building, you just have to go to the town and you don't have to go to the planning commission. So I'm sure I'm wrong, but I wish you would, make that look clearer. Thank you.
I see Cody vigorously taking notes. I think we'll cover it.
I will certainly do my best to go back and address those questions.
Thank you, Kathy. All right, anybody else? Okay, we will close the public hearing portion, bring it back to the board for some discussion, and also include Mr. Byrd to answer some of these questions, hopefully. Did the commissioners have any comments on anything? Well, we'll give Cody a couple minutes here.
I can start a little bit here. Just in a couple of the comments, Sherelle, when you had mentioned about churches, existing churches, and absolutely, I've been looking at that too. This is a piece where we're looking at the future building of. So it doesn't mean that the River of Life, it doesn't mean that any of the churches are going to be displaced. They're there. Does that make sense? Was I hearing you right, that you were worried that our land use, the code is changing for downtown district that wouldn't allow a church?
Well, so that's what, from my understanding, that's what was explained, is that if something were to happen to that church, they could not rebuild in C2.
Okay.
Any clarification on that?
That was a question I had too.
So if the question going back to the nonconformities section, if there's an existing use on a piece of property and the land use code changes to where it's no longer allowed, the nonconformities section would apply to that property, that structure.
So is this the residence in C2 scenario over again? So do we need to look at a provision to allow a non-conforming church in a C2 district to be rebuilt should something happen to it, the same way we looked at the non-conforming house in C2?
That's a policy question that we could, certainly it's something that can be done. I think, and this may warrant that in this particular set of circumstances. I would also throw out there though, that the non-conforming section applies to all of our zone districts, to every existing structure in the town. And so if, there does become a question of where do you draw the line? And if it still needs to be effective for administering the effectiveness of the code in other ways, if you make a statement that this non-conforming chapter applies to all properties and all zone districts, all uses, and then go back and specifically amend out every single use, structure, and property, it's not being effective from a legal standpoint, and it's creating inconsistencies in application. So I think on a limited basis for specific areas, I think it's okay to do so. As a general policy rule, I would not support or encourage going district by district, every single use, and amending some and not others.
I have a question. We discussed earlier about potentially changing religious land use from conditional to permitted, and that was relating to C1 and open. Is that my understanding?
Can you run it by me again?
We were considering changing religious land use from conditional to permitted in C1 and open. Is that right?
Actually, it's C1, just to bring it in alignment with our allowance for community facility, which is
With
the
community
other
facilities. Okay, I see.
assembly type use.
All right.
And I don't have there's equal protection is a pretty light standard for local government, as long as we have a rational basis to exempt someone, or a use, I think that's fine. And I certainly think there is a rational basis maybe for churches, just to protect people's right to worship, things like that. People's houses, I think, is a compelling one. So, as long as there's a rational basis for an exemption, I think that's fine.
Or maybe might be a rational one for these churches on Main
Sure.
Street, right?
Sir, I would think there is.
Well, they were built a little while ago, some of these things, okay?
Mhm.
And they're not following a lot of guidelines, like these new businesses around town, they've got updated guidelines when they built them. So if something burnt down there, I'm sure they could probably put their building back pretty easily without problems because they're built correctly. These other guys have encroached upon things over time because they were allowed to, or their setbacks aren't quite right, those kind of things, all those kind of things they can fall into. So I think they were kind of ahead of the game here, and I think trying to expect them to fall back. And I think that's a good area for exemption down this Old Town Main Street kind of thing,
Yeah, what is River of Life? What is the current zoning district for River of Life? So none of this
So
applies.
I can answer that question. The River of Life Church is the church facility at the curve of Highway 1 is in Larimer County, not in the town of Wellington. Their youth services building, the AMP, is on Cleveland Avenue, and that facility is zone C2.
But it won't be if and when this is adopted. They will be non-conforming after the adoption of this land use code, correct? And filling station will be too.
As currently written, we need to probably limit responses from the audience at this point,
Yeah,
Chair. This is
let's, guys, I will just make that note. This is planning commission discussion. If we get through discussion and there's still a question that needs to be asked or that hasn't been addressed, then we'll save some time at the end of the discussion.
And thank you. It's difficult for staff to hear the questions from the commission when I've got two different ears going here. So the question that was asked was, if the proposed land use code is adopted as written, yes, the religious land uses that are currently in C2 as written would not, they would fall into the nonconformities section chapter of this draft code. As Mr. White with White and Smith Law LLC had suggested, if there's a rational basis for why that would be exempt from the nonconformities and be allowed to be rebuilt, if that's the rational basis that this commission wants to recommend, that would be a reasonable from a defensibility standpoint.
I guess I feel if we're going to allow it for residents in C2, then we have to allow it. If we're going to allow it for one non-conforming use in that district, we have to allow it for all, correct?
No, that would be very.
Not just non-conforming.
No, we do not.
No.
Sorry,
We can make
Mr. White-
distinctions.
Sorry, I wanted to acknowledge Mr. White was trying to speak, and it is a little hard to hear him here in the room. So Mark, you have the floor.
Yeah, yes, you don't have to allow the same exemption for every use that you do for one. All you need is a rational basis to distinguish them. And I think somebody's interest in living in their house, they have certain considerations that don't apply to other uses, and religious land uses occupy a special place in the law as well. That and have protections under the law that commercial uses don't have. So I think there's more than a rational basis for exempting those two uses. I don't think that means you've opened up everything else, and I don't think you have to now exempt like a recycling facility too, just because you exempted a church. So I don't think those considerations apply to all the other uses.
Am I understanding correctly? Are you saying that rational use is just available, or we still need to accommodate for those two specific scenarios?
Basically the test, if you're exempting something and somebody sued you and said, well, you didn't exempt me, So you violated my equal protection rights. What courts usually look at is there a rational basis for distinguishing that one use over another? And usually the judges don't like to legislate, at least they're not supposed to. So they usually give you a lot of deference unless somebody meets a very heavy burden to overcome that. Unless somebody's, unless there's unless a recycling facility, for example, had a fundamental right. Recycling is not a fundamental right under the law, but there are other rights that are. Unless that's the case, courts are nearly always going to defer to your judgment on whether the one use was worthy of exemption, but not another. I think sometimes I hear people say things like, well, if we start exempting one use, we have to exempt all of them. That's just not the case at all, not even close. You have discretion to decide who merits an exemption. You just need a rational basis for those distinctions. I think those bases are very clear for someone living in their own house and for uses that involve people worshiping. Those are two things that that I think are given very strong consideration under the law. One's one of our First Amendment rights, and I think judges in courts have always recognized and given people a lot of latitude with what they're doing in their own home. But that doesn't mean we have to give the same exemption to transit facilities and airports and salvage yards and everything else. They don't have the same reasons, I think, for the exemptions that these others do.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
So does it, gosh, this is loud. Does it sound like this is where we're going with these particular, the amp and the filling station on Cleveland, similar to what we're doing? I'm trying to sum this up in my own head and understand. Is that sort of where we're going with this? Have I gotten that correct?
I think so. I would hate to see them, those two particular, I understand. Thank you for clarifying, Mark. I understand about the rest of the businesses he used as an example, but if something were to happen to the amp and the filling station, I would expect that was given the same latitude to rebuild as they wish as a residence in C2. So is that good enough for insurance? Is that good enough for building permits that the town just says you're exempt? Go ahead and rebuild. That's a sound that's legally binding.
And I think this is Cody again. What I was hearing Mr. White say from a legal standpoint was that if you've got a compelling reason and rational nexus for exempting a particular land use from the non-conforming provisions, that you would apply it equally to all of those types of uses. And so I guess the question that may come up is, from a document standpoint, this is a question for Mr. White. Would it be better to identify those specific uses in the use table as allowed within these districts, or would it be better to write a general exemption statement for where applicable to certain uses in the Chapter 7 for nonconformities?
Well, that's a policy issue. I mean, if you want to just allow them in the district, then nonconformity doesn't even come into play. They're just an allowed use. The question I was responding to was, I think what we had resolved earlier was that this 50% reconstruction limitation in nonconformities, we were going to exempt single family homes from that. Somebody mentioned exempting churches from that as well. So an existing church could rebuild even if they were destroyed to 100% of their value, as could residences. And what I was reacting to was the concern that, oh, wow, we've exempted those two. Now we have to go line by line and exempt all of these uses from that. And I just wanted to pipe in because that's not the case. All you need, it's not even you mentioned it's not a compelling interest, and it's just a rational basis. And so, I mean, there have actually been court cases that have said, if it's as irrational as closing your eyes and picking a name out of the phone book, or a coin toss, if it's that irrational, maybe a court will step in. Beyond that, anything you can hypothesize in court would suffice, and courts are going to go with your judgment. So I just reacted because I hear this all the time. Well, if I exempt these two uses, now we're making our ordinance legally suspect, and I don't think you are. You just need just hypothesize a reason. If there's any reason you can think of that sounds rational for those two, then that's good enough. I don't think it exposes your use table or that provision of the nonconformity section to, I mean, somebody could challenge it. They have an extreme uphill battle. I mean, good luck to them. They're wasting their money, I think, if they're challenging that. You have a lot of discretion in carving out those exemptions. So basically you have two choices here. I mean, you could just make those uses permitted, in which case nonconformity is not even an issue. You have a lot of discretion in deciding what uses are allowed in which districts. There are some limits to that. One of them I mentioned earlier. You have to treat religious land uses on equal terms with other assembly type uses. You can't be more strict about them. So if you permit one assembly type use in a district, you can't exclude a church, nor if you permit that assembly type use by right, you can't require a conditional use permit for a church. That would mean you're treating a church more strictly. You can't do that. But otherwise, you have a lot of discretion in allowing uses in the districts. So that's one option. The other is if there's a concern that somebody living in their own house would not be able to rebuild if they don't meet these limits that we've established for property value. And we think that's too strict. It might cause somebody to get turned out of their home if the wind blew and knocked their house down or something else happened. And we think we should give that somebody who's a longtime resident of the town that kind of consideration. Then I think that's a legitimate reason for that exemption. The same with churches. I mean, if we want to, somebody spoke earlier about all the benefits that churches offer the community. That's a reasonable thing to consider. We know people have a First Amendment right to worship. And so that's a constitutionally protected right. And I think that is a good reason to exempt churches from what we would otherwise require for businesses or other uses that are non-conforming. So I think those two are fine. I don't think that exposes the rest of I don't think you now have to go line by line and now look at all the other uses. I think you're probably good with those two. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm seeing some head nodding.
Several times.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
I'd prefer it in chapter 7 personally. I don't think we should change the permitted uses necessarily, but I think we should make provisions for nonconformities in relation to those two scenarios, both residential and religious use in C2.
I agree. I think there's a reason we left religious land use out of C2 along with the community, so it's on equal footing.
Yeah.
I don't want to go back and change that either. That's new development. I don't think it's pertinent to have Cleveland Ave lined with churches, but 100% we need to protect the ones that are already there.
Yeah. Sounds good.
I just want to say eloquently concise, thank you.
Moving on. I wanted to kind of summarize some stuff that we've gone through, if that's okay. Sure. Okay. Some of the changes I think that have been recommended tonight that I think are in line with a lot of the comment we received as well are those relating to the sign code that we talked about, size and quantity of temporary signs. We talked about removing pawn shops from C2. We talked about non-conforming uses for what we just talked about, religious and residential exceptions for C2. And what are some of the other major changes I think that we requested? I was hoping to get a list of that so I kind of have an understanding of all those items. Oh, and then the church is changing from conditional to permitted, C1. Are there any other major changes we've recommended already tonight? Or sorry, religious use, I shouldn't say churches.
So I was jotting notes, and so I apologize if I repeat something that Commissioner Kinney just said.
We should do it.
But the significant changes that I've heard for tonight included the consideration to allow existing residential homes in the C2 and religious land uses in the C2 to allow them to be rebuilt regardless of extent of damage or loss, to allow 2 years for initiating reconstruction, subject to reasonable extensions, remove pawn shops from the C2 and add separation buffers between similar type uses, and to change the sign code to allow in the downtown community commercial and in the downtown core and the community commercial, as well as the C3 and industrial light industrial districts, to allow up to 32 square feet per street frontage for temporary signs. Those were the 4 significant changes that I've heard requested being changed tonight.
Okay. Thanks. I just want to make sure I had those in front of me.
Matches my list.
Mr. Bird, do you have any, are you going to be responding to any other of the public comments at this time, or we got a little off track, and I just wanted to ask you that.
Sure, understood. So I was frantically jotting notes for everything that I was hearing. And a lot of it's in shorthand, so I can't promise I caught every single word, but I tried to capture the general context. Were there any specific questions from commissioners regarding anything that you heard tonight that you'd like me to respond to first? Otherwise, I can go through my list of notes.
Go for it. I'll ask more questions later.
Okay.
See if you heard the same thing we heard.
I'm gonna try. I was taking notes at the same time, so if I missed something, let me know, and I will go back and readdress. So for me, it makes sense to just go through chronologically on my notes. There was a comment about areas on the future land use map that were outside the town, and I just want to clarify that that statement has nothing to do with the current land use code adoption, which is only applicable to properties within the town of Wellington. There was a question about churches in C2, which we've just discussed. A question about signs. Does the size really matter? Again, this is my shorthand. Does the size really matter? Comment about lighted signs on historic buildings have some challenges with electrical. We agree with that. We know that there's a challenge there. I think that was the statement was concluded with the individual supported allowing banners in the downtown. So we did recommend some changes to increase temporary signage for downtown businesses. Comments about electrical codes. We commented on that earlier as well. The traffic circle at County Road 9 and combines, that's the engineering design for roadway improvements is not something that the Planning Commission considers. It's an engineering standard. We certainly recognize the challenges that our agricultural community around Wellington has, and we've asked the county to partner with us to take a look at those needs from the county properties and those agricultural uses. I'm trying to highlight some of the questions to be answered, not highlighting every single comment that was made. Comment about additional flexibility for signs. And I gathered from the way it was commented that maybe some of the changes that we discussed satisfied that concern. A desire to look at the the land use code and the official zoning map at the same time, was one of the comments that was made. Procedurally, it's typical to adopt the legislative act first to know what the rules in place will be, and then go back and zone the properties with those specific changes so that they understand the applicability.
So what does that process, real in a nutshell, what's going to happen there?
So the process of updating the official zoning map.
Yeah.
The planning commission would make a recommendation. We'll take a look at the zoning map on the wall, what's currently zoned, and then what would be an appropriate zone district for those areas under the new district categories in the land use code. The planning commission would make a recommendation to the board of trustees, and the board of trustees would adopt the official zoning map.
And that process takes a little time.
It does. It requires, I mean, the conversation could be relatively short in the context of, we know that the new land use code proposed doesn't have a transitional zone district. So all the transitional properties, zone transitional today, would need to be reassigned an appropriate zone district. I think we have a pretty good sense as to what those would or should be. Town staff would notify those property owners of the potential changes, and allow them to come and comment to town staff and request changes if need be. And they can certainly come and speak at a public hearing that would be advertised for consideration of the zoning map. So I think the conversations could be short in terms of which parcels make sense for which zone district. But the process itself requires advertisements, communication with individual property owners, public hearings, and then eventual adoption. Other comments and questions? I'm not sure I captured all of this one, but there was a comment about housing affordability and that, smaller lot sizes would support more affordable housing. And so and that was as far as my note got. I think there was also a comment about some of the lots include minimum lot sizes of 3,000 square feet. And I wanted to clarify that in the table for dimensional standards, there are some provisions for 3,000 square feet. And I think there's one that's pretty similar to that, 4,000 or 3,200, something to that effect. That those are noted as being specific to attached single family. We don't have any zone district where we're recommending a minimum lot size of 3,000 square feet for detached. Some subsequent comments about minimum lot sizes. Maybe I heard allow smaller lot sizes, but require minimum setbacks of 10 feet. And requiring the fire separation or fire resistance ratings for materials. Our current building codes have provisions for fire rating for different types of structures. Our residential code requires cement fiberboard siding or similar equal or better type of language, which is more fire resistant than, say, wood lap siding. So the building code that's separate from this consideration does have provisions for materials and fire resistance for structures. There was a question about group homes and protected populations, which we answered at the moment, but I'll reiterate now. The land use table includes group homes, which my understanding would include the host homes, which is a term that we will verify is compatible with this, but group homes are permitted uses in all of our residential categories, and we will verify if the manufactured home parks or mobile home parks need to include that designation as well.
Cody, can I jump in real fast too on that one?
Uh,
I wonder the way host homes were described by the speaker, if they just fall within the definition of a family. That can,
Mark, could you speak up a little bit, please?
Okay, sorry. I wonder if the way the speaker defined host homes, and I didn't see the term host home in the ordinance, and I wonder if that's because it would just be considered a family, because we allow related folks and up to a certain number, I think maybe 2, of unrelated folks. And I wonder if that would a host home would fit within that category, in which case we wouldn't even need to mention them in the table. It might help for clarity to add that to the definition of family, if that helps. I'm just throwing that out there. That's the first time I'd heard that term, so.
Yeah, agreed, Mark. That term was new to me as well. And I do think the definition of family would probably be a consideration for that. I see Mrs. Eifert has her hand up, and I would encourage her to meet with staff so we can make sure that your specific concerns are addressed. We'd like to have a conversation offline and discuss that further so we can allow the meeting to continue to move forward. But we certainly understand the need and the intent. There's certainly no intent from the town's perspective to limit that use.
Let's keep the public comments out of the discussion for the time being.
Additional questions that I noted, and the question on the comprehensive plan as a policy document versus a master plan came up from a couple individuals. We will have our town attorney review, that's in section 1.06, applicability of the land use code to the comprehensive plan. We'll have the town attorney review that. If changes are needed, he can make some specific recommendations on the wording there.
Mr. Berg, is it possible that it sounds like several people are very concerned about this? Is it a reasonable time frame to, Mr. Sapienza is much more eloquent being a lawyer or knowing this stuff. Is it a reasonable time frame that might be available for tomorrow? Because the Board of Trustees will be going, we're going to be doing it all over again. And I don't know if that's a reasonable request. It's less than 24 hours away. So
I will certainly pose the question, and I will see if we can have that addressed for tomorrow night.
okay, thank you.
Cody, on that note, because it kind of goes right, dovetails right with it, ask them about the procedures on amending the land use code as you go further. How does that work?
So, yeah, I can answer that question for you tonight. I mean, amending the land use code goes through the same process that we've been going through. Any change to the land use code, it's a legislative document. So the planning commission would make recommendations, it would advertise public hearings, recommendation from the planning commission gets forwarded to the Board of Trustees, another public hearing, Board of
back through it all
Trustees
again,
makes
the
the
whole thing.
final adoption.
Yeah.
Yes, to the extent that if the change being requested is, if it's one particular section of the code, it's not going to be as long of a conversation as the whole code that
No.
we've gone through recently.
Right.
But we just have to advertise public hearings.
About tweaks and that kind of
Mhm.
thing, right?
Yep.
So to clarify, all someone would have to do is come before the planning commission on a public comment night and suggest that they would like a revision to the land use code. Doesn't matter who it is, it could be anybody.
Correct. And they could come to the planning commission or the Board of Trustees. Either board can recommend making amendments to the land use code.
I kind of wanted to go back to what Tim just asked though, and just a little clarity, because, we've done the comprehensive plan adopted, by our group, the planning commission, as well as the trustees. So us going forward and what we're doing now, at this being the land use code, that answering this question, how is that impacting what the land use code is we're deciding today, whether it's policy or it doesn't, does it? Yeah,
I don't
'Cause-
believe it does, but I will certainly ask the
Okay.
attorney if it has any legal effect.
yeah, because I think it's great to have clarity of what that is,
Mhm.
but we're working now, we've gone forward to the land use code. So I kind of got a little confused there, feeling like we were kind of backtracking, going back to what the comprehensive plan was, but I think clarity on that is great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bring it back in.
Yeah. And if it's just a simple change of wording in this document to be consistent with the resolution that was passed by the Board of Trustees, I believe that would be a relatively easy thing to do. I don't think that changing a couple of words for consistency is going to change the legal effect. But we'll chat with the town attorney. There were several comments, I'm just continuing through my notes. There were several comments about animal establishments and the provisions relative to those. I understood a lot of the comments and concerns that were raised. I think I would respond generally with when you have animal establishments within town limits, there are certain protections that are typical and best practices for having those animals in enclosed structures, not leave them out overnight, helps protect the animals as well if those facilities aren't monitored 24 hours a day. Barking dogs, kennels, there's some provisions that are general best practices to ensure that those uses are compatible with surrounding properties. There was a question about the planning commission being referred variances, and there was a whole section of the code that in this revised draft was eliminated. That was a purposeful change. The language was a copy and paste from another section, and it was referring variances to the planning commission, which is not how that procedure works. Variances are reviewed and heard by the Board of Adjustments. So that change was purposeful. Relative to the table in the procedures section, earlier, there was an asterisk noted next to town board, and the asterisk clarifies that for variances, town board means town Board of Adjustments. So those were both updated for consistency and in clarity that the variances are heard by the planning or by the Board of Adjustments.
That it was the R that was underneath planning commission. So planning commission gets skipped in the chart.
The planning commission does not hear any variances.
Right, but it says there's an R there, so it means recommendation. And I thought that meant that those were specific meetings that you would have.
I will take a look at that and circle back and make sure that we've got it corrected. If I'm just having a hard time finding the right page here right now. Page 17. Okay, I see what you're saying. So you're correct. We would remove the R because the planning commission does not review the variances. Yep, you're correct. Thank you for pointing that out. We will make that correction. The correction is to the table for procedures for variances. It currently states that the planning commission would review variances, which is not correct. So we will make that change. Thank you. And then another question was on administrative approval for condominium maps. That was recommended as an administrative procedure. Condominium maps are laid out party walls on a building. Once the building is built or even proposed to be built and approved, the planning commission is done with its land use approval process. The condominium map simply designates these are the units within that structure, and it doesn't have any planning function in reviewing and approving that. So it's just a simple administrative procedure to legally establish this unit is separate from that unit within that structure. So that we did propose that as an administrative approval because there's not much from this code that's applicable to that particular set of circumstances. Comments were made about the Parks and Rec Advisory Board. I did present the draft or sections of the draft code to the Parks and Rec Advisory Board for input on landscaping and parks and open spaces. We did get some of the changes that were discussed in this. I appreciate the comments that were made relative to pocket parks. Just to provide a little bit of context, the discussion at the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, the town staff had presented that some of the past procedures for requiring park and open space dedications have resulted in a lot of small parks that are owned and maintained by the town that puts a significant strain on our staffing abilities to go and mow those weekly and maintain those, replace the wood mulch and other things, and move the equipment from multiple sites every week to do that maintenance. The suggestion was made that pocket parks may be better served if they were owned and maintained by an HOA for that specific neighborhood that pocket park is serving. Our current code allows the town to grant that permission for an HOA to own and maintain those pocket parks. And so staff had suggested, we certainly understand the comment that was made tonight. We had recommended not requiring that, but rather allowing it to be permissive so that the planning commission, the Parks and Rec Board, the town board of trustees can consider on a park by park basis whether it's appropriate for that to be in private ownership and maintenance or town ownership and maintenance. So we definitely considered it. And our Parks and Rec staff has made it very clear that it's a challenge for them to maintain all these small parks, and their emphasis would be to focus on larger regional parks serving multiple neighborhoods from a maintenance and public use standpoint. So that's something that we would encourage be considered at the time of subdivision approval. The planning commission can recommend on it, and the board of trustees can make that decision on whether it's a town-owned park or a private park. And then going through my last of my notes here. I think we maybe touched on it here, but and it may be just in response to a question, but the comment was made that the current code only allows the planning commission to make a recommendation for an amendment change. And we can update that for consistency. Either the planning commission or the board of trustees can initiate that process of change. We'll verify that the language reflects that accurately. If we may have just missed it, but the intent is that either board can initiate that. And then the last note that I had was a comment about we should consider goats in town. And I'll simply suffice it to say we have a whole nother section of the municipal code that addresses animals. And I think that change, if desired, and I couldn't even tell you today what exactly that code section says, but changes to goats and other animals, I would say is a separate process for the municipal code amendments. So those were the notes that I made, and I hope that I've addressed the questions. I would like to follow up with Ms. Eifert on your specific questions relative to your use.
Trail talk and you let Kathy talk even after you told me not to talk. And I think that's not right.
All right.
I can say that.
You can't actually. We're going to maintain respect in this meeting.
I didn't call him any name.
Hey,
I didn't call
this
him
is
any
board
name.
discussion. Board discussion.
Other people from the community speak during this time. So for some reason I'm discriminated against, I can't talk. That's not right.
I thought it was really interesting that the topic of affordable housing versus density was brought up so frequently tonight. That's not something we've heard before. I mean, in every previous conversation leading up to this point, we've heard no high density, no high density, no high density. And then I think we kind of got a different perspective tonight. And I didn't expect to hear a lot of new things tonight, to be completely honest. I thought we had really heard everything. So I thought that was kind of refreshing to hear that is, I mean, that's important to me, but it's refreshing to hear from multiple people that that's really an important direction for the community as well. And the truth is more affordability generally comes with higher density. So we've been kind of planning against that and pushing everything in the opposite direction of that. But it's nice to hear that, you know, both perspectives are heard. So I think that's good. I don't think that anything within the current code right now, and the question of setbacks came up. And so I've noticed that before, that, for example, downtown neighborhood setbacks changing from 7 to 5 on side, because I was planning a garage. So, and it was going to have to be in my very narrow lot, essentially right in the middle of my whole backyard because of it. But just that 2-foot shift actually makes a huge difference in those really narrow, tiny lots downtown. So, and I know that 10-foot distance between your neighbors is important for the fire safety, but I would recommend keeping that because when you have tiny lots, tiny lots, but you can't have the accommodations that you need on your lot, it really doesn't make it livable. So I'm hearing all those kind of things, but I think we have it done pretty well. And I think that I'm glad that we accommodate for those smaller lots for attached units. I think that's really important too, because that's where the affordable housing is going to come from.
And following up on the comment about the minimum lot square footage, Lisa, I know that was your comment. I don't know that I'd say a developer wouldn't look at Wellington. I can tell you from experience, I work in construction. If a developer identifies Wellington as a place where they want to construct and develop some sort of affordable housing unit, a minimum lot set or a minimum lot requirement of 3,000 when they're looking for 2,400 is not going to stop them. That's a quick meeting with Cody. And I mean, you can apply for a variance to get around that. So in general, I agree. I think it's a best practice to keep it where it is. Just understand that that's not a deal breaker for developments.
Chairman, if I may too, I would also throw out there that if there was a significant challenge for a proposed development, that lot sizes were a question. We also have our planned use development procedures that could allow for a whole subdivision if a density change or some density variety was needed for that subdivision. There's a whole other process in place that could allow some flexibility.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying, Cody.
Good to know.
I just want to make one comment about the setbacks. I mean, what happened down in town of Boulder, I mean, I know we get some winds here, but they had 100-mile-an-hour winds down there. I mean, pretty unusual circumstances that would even allow that to happen. I mean, having fire-resistant material, great. You know, I think that's prudent. It's going to just be drier here, so. But it was a pretty extreme event down there.
Well, after hearing public comment, I think there are some significant changes still. I think it's a short list. I think Rebecca and Cody kind of rattled through those. Would you mind one more time, just kind of go through the list and maybe we can get this to a point where we can bring it back into approval, et cetera.
I'd be happy to run through the list unless Commissioner Kinney wants to.
No, no, do it. I'm gonna write down and I'll see what I got. I guess.
Okay. All right, the notes that, and this isn't specific wording, but the general topics that we'll have to draft any changes that you recommend from a wording standpoint, but the subject matter, the points that I heard for follow-up revisions included relative to residential properties, existing residential properties in the C2 zone and religious land uses in the C2 zone to allow those uses to be rebuilt regardless of extent of any damage or loss, to allow 2 years for initiating reconstruction of a loss subject to reasonable extensions. I heard remove the pawn shop land use from the C2 zone district and add separation buffers, and to change the sign provisions to allow up to 32 square feet per street frontage, any number of signs for the downtown core, the community commercial, highway commercial, industrial and light industrial districts. And I will, I made noted, change the procedure table on page 17 to remove the planning commission review of variances. This was Mrs. Vidalis's comment. And then the last one that I would add is general cleanup for language formatting, spelling typos, and general nature of a non-substantive nature.
Anyone have anything else? Major changes that we feel like we need to discuss at length outside of that list? Okay, I don't either. I feel like we've polished a lot of it up. I'm sure there are still things that are not going to satisfy everyone in every circumstance. The document as a whole, I think, aside from the major changes that we're looking to make here before it goes to the Board of Trustees, really, it cleans up my major concerns. It sounds like it cleans up the rest of the Planning Commission's major concerns. So what's the procedure? I'm of the mindset that we can approve this conditionally addressing these changes. So I'll ask your guidance as to the best route is to do that.
Yeah, so thanks, Chairman Sarter. Sorry, I've got to keep adding the chairman there. I'm used to saying commissioner. Thank you, Chairman Sarter. The procedure, there's 3 options available to the Planning Commission when you're considering amendments to a land use code. You can approve the draft recommendations as presented. You can approve the recommendations with substantive changes. You can always not approve them, so you could deny it, or you can table it if you need to allow additional public comment or additional considerations to be considered. So I should say 4 options. You can approve it, you can deny it, you can approve it with conditions for changes, or you can table it for additional communications, conversations, etc. In your board packet, I've included 3 possible motions. I did not include a motion to deny. You typically do not take a positive action for a negative effect. if it would simply come down to the motion may be to approve or to approve with conditions. And if there aren't a requisite number of votes to pass, then it simply doesn't pass. So I've included those three motions in the packet that went to the Planning Commission. If the desire is to approve with revisions, I would recommend stating the enumerated or referencing the enumerated revisions that were just discussed.
I'm honestly a fan of, and I know we're just still in discussion at this point, but approving it with revisions and suggestions so that the board is aware of the changes that have been acknowledged by this commission. If not, it is as is, and they're considering that document. I would like for them to make sure that they're taking into consideration the results of this public hearing and knowing the items that were meant to be adjusted. So that would be my preference, and I would be willing to move forward on that tonight.
Is that a motion?
It's a statement. It's different.
Well, now, get out of there. So what does that mean? Give a list to the board, what we did on those, that list that we went over? They need to be aware of that? Because we're gonna have this discussion tomorrow. You're gonna present that?
Yeah,
Okay.
I will, from a staff standpoint, I will absolutely enumerate
Yeah.
those recommended
All right.
changes to the Board of Trustees tomorrow night.
Okay.
Just contextually, if we're discussing the upcoming steps in this overall process, as a reminder, tomorrow night, the Board of Trustees is just being presented the draft language. We can enumerate those changes the Planning Commission discussed tonight. The question relative to the Planning Commission for your action tonight is forwarding a recommendation to the Board of Trustees. So if your recommendation was to approve with conditions, or if the motion fails, that would not be it would be a recommendation that the board might need to remand some additional considerations to the Planning Commission. But if you would choose to forward a recommendation to the Board of Trustees, we would need to have a motion either approving with conditions, and then we'll take a vote and see where that ends up.
You guys heard the man.
Be happy to move forward. Yeah? Okay. Yeah, I move that we send a recommendation of approval to the Board of Trustees for the Land Use Code Draft 2 with the following considerations. 1, ensuring that existing residential and religious uses in C2, if they are to be damaged, can be rebuilt with that process initiating within 2 years. 2, removing pawn shops from C2 and considering that separation buffers. 3, the changes as discussed regarding temporary sign changes and dimensions. 4, procedure regarding variance, the fact that it does not require recommendation from the Planning Commission, referencing page 17. 5, noting that either the Board of Trustees or the Planning Commission can request changes to the code, and other finalizing features, including formatting, grammar, spelling, technical review, or any other changes that do not have a substantial impact to the code.
Second. Very good, Rebecca.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Knack,
Yes.
Kenny,
Yes.
McCaffrey,
Yes.
Whitehouse,
Yes.
Hammond,
Yes.
Sarter.
Yes. All right, y'all, that was the big one.
Can I ask one follow-up question with Mr. Berg? Regarding pawn shops, was there also a discussion to allow them in light industrial? Was that, or am I misremembering?
That's pending the buffer requirements, from my understanding.
Yes, so we did, at my encouragement, I think it might be prudent to consider expanding them to allow pawn shops in the light industrial district if the buffer separations would limit the number of locations viable in the C3 or C1 zones. So if you'd like, you could amend your motion with that change, or we can simply present it to the Board of Trustees to consider that as part of their consideration. I
Say
think
we just let them know that that would be a possible
Included in your
solution.
presentation,
and staff will
yes.
take a look at that and see what the effect of a buffer would be, and we can propose some recommendations to the Board of Trustees for that item.
I think that's sufficient. Okay, anything else? All right, any other announcements from staff?
There's a public hearing that's been advertised for the April 4th Planning Commission meeting. So I wanted to advise you of that. That was probably going to be the only item on that agenda, is a public hearing for a rezone. So please be aware that there's a public hearing. If you get questions or comments, our quasi judicial capacity here subjects us to ex parte communications that we have to disclose. So if you get contacted by anyone questioning or trying to solicit you information regarding a rezone change, you might just acknowledge that you're aware that there's a hearing that's coming before the Planning Commission and you'd prefer not to comment on it. That way we'll be able to present in a public hearing format all of the information to all the members at the same time.
Thank you for the heads up on that, Mr. Berg.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, any other announcements?
I don't have any other announcements.
All right, we will adjourn the March meeting of the Planning Commission. Thank you, everyone.
Good job, guys.
Yeah, very much.
Thank you.